first thing I noticed about Catachan was that the green was wrong. I'd spent 18 years on Verdun 3, farming land my family had worked for 3 generations. I knew green. I knew the pale shoots of new grain, the deep emerald of summer wheat, the way healthy crops should look under a proper sun. The green below me through the lander's scratched viewport was none of those things. It was too vivid, almost luminescent, the color of something that had evolved past simple photosynthesis into something closer to appetite. The canopy stretched to every horizon without break, moving in patterns that weren't quite wind-driven, and looking at it made my farmer's instincts scream warnings my conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. Inside the bulk lander, Tithe Keeper, 200 bodies pressed together in crash webbing that cut into shoulders and thighs. The recycled air was thick with fear sweat and the chemical tang of vomit from the zero-G collection bags that had stopped working properly 3 days into our journey. Someone near me was praying, someone else was crying. Most of us had learned to do both silently. The lander hit Catachan's outer atmosphere and turbulence began. Not the gentle buffeting of atmospheric entry, violent shaking that rattled teeth and made the viewport frames groan. Then I saw why. The clouds weren't clouds. They were acidic, yellow-green and roiling, and as we descended through them, I watched the viewport's protective coating begin to fog and pit. Droplets of atmosphere were eating the plasteel in real time. 18 minutes to ground, the pilot's vox crackled. Emperor protects. It sounded like a warning, not a blessing. I'd survived the Tyranids by staying still, by being small, by hiding in the grain silos on Verdun 3 for 3 weeks while the splinter fleet consumed everything that moved. I listened to my family die. I listened to the sound of feeding, of chitin on metal, of screaming that went on longer than screaming should. When the Munitorum found me, still hiding in the dark with the desiccated corpses of rats I'd eaten raw, they took me as replacement Tithe. The conscription officer said I had survival instincts, said the Emperor could use men who knew how to endure. Looking at that wrong green below, I wondered if courage mattered when the world itself wanted you dead. The lander broke through the cloud layer and I saw Catachan properly for the first time. Endless, that was the word that came to mind. The canopy stretched in every direction, a living carpet of hostile green that moved with purpose, not randomness. Then I saw forward selection post Gamma 7. It looked like a wound, a small clearing of raised earth and prefab structures surrounded by jungle that pressed against the perimeter like water against a failing dam. The structures were stained, organic-looking despite being plasteel and rockcrete. The jungle was trying to reclaim them. It would eventually succeed. As we descended, details emerged. The perimeter fence was triple-layered, topped with razor wire, but sections were already overgrown, strangled by vines thick as my thigh. The landing pad itself had cracks where vegetation pushed through, and around the camp's edge, hanging from the trees, I saw shapes wrapped in canvas. At first, I thought they were supply drops. Then I realized they were corpses, dozens of them hanging like obscene fruit. The jungle kept its own memorials. The lander touched down with a bone-jarring impact. The ramp began to lower. The smell hit us before the heat did, rot and growth happening simultaneously, something chemical that burned my sinuses, and underneath it all, the coppery reek of old blood. Someone near me whispered, "Emperor, preserve us." The ramp clanged fully open, and the green light flooded in, wrong and hungry and waiting. The heat was a physical blow. Not the dry heat of Verdun summers, but wet heat, oppressive heat, heat that felt alive and hostile. The humidity was so thick I could barely draw breath. Each inhalation felt like drowning in warm water. Within seconds, sweat sheeted every exposed surface. My fatigues were already soaked. The smell was overwhelming. Decay and aggressive growth. The chemical stink of counterseptic from the camp, and that copper blood undertone that made my stomach clench. A recruit 3 rows ahead of me collapsed, before we'd been standing 2 minutes. Just folded, like someone had cut his strings. Native Catachan guards, lean, scarred, moving with liquid grace that made my farm-bred clumsiness obvious, dragged him to the side of the pad. They didn't call for medics. They watched him convulse with clinical interest. One made a note on a data slate. The recruit stopped moving. The guards left him there and returned to their positions. 200 had become 199 before we'd even begun. Sergeant Venko appeared. She was small, barely over 5 feet, but moved like a knife in human skin. Ritual scars covered her visible arms in parallel lines, clean and deliberate. She stopped before our assembled mass and spoke so quietly we had to lean forward to hear. "You are soft meat," she whispered. "Off-world. Weak." The paws stretched. The jungle buzzed and creaked behind her. 200 arrived. 140 will die in the next 10 weeks. Perhaps more. Perhaps all of you. Another pause. My heart hammered. "I am Sergeant Venko. I have killed 17 trainees personally." She raised her scarred arms slightly. "Each mark is one of them. Anyone who wastes my time will be the 18th. Her voice never rose above that whisper. Somehow that made it worse. Shouting I could have dismissed as theater. This quiet certainty was something else entirely. I studied her while she spoke. Every movement was economical, nothing wasted. Her eyes scanned us with a predator's assessment, sorting us into categories I didn't want to contemplate. When her gaze passed over me, I felt evaluated and dismissed in a single second. She wore standard fatigues, stained with things I didn't want to identify. A Catachan fang, the massive knife every native carried, hung at her hip. The blade's length seemed ridiculous, oversized, but watching her move I knew she could draw and kill me before I registered the motion. I thought of the grain silos on Verdun 3. I'd learned to be still there, to be small, to survive by not being noticed. Looking at Venko, I understood that wouldn't work here. Catachan didn't let you hide. It found you and killed you, or you became something that could kill back. My mother used to say the Emperor protects. My mother was consumed by tyrannids while I hid 40 meters away, listening. The Emperor didn't protect her. He wouldn't protect me here either. If I survived, it would be because I became something she wouldn't recognize. The thought terrified me, but not as much as dying. Venko gestured. Guards moved among us, distributing water flasks. A recruit near me, gaunt, desperate, took a long drink. His face went slack. The flask dropped. He began clawing at his throat. Venko watched. "The water was treated," she whispered. "Those flasks were not. Lesson 1. Everything here wants to kill you. Everything. Even the containers." The recruit was convulsing now, foam bubbling from his lips. Venko consulted a chronometer. "He will die in 6 minutes. Use that time to remember this lesson." She turned away. The recruit's convulsions slowed. The chronometer ticked. Someone behind me was crying. Venko didn't look back. I held my untouched flask and felt my throat suddenly vulnerable, suddenly exposed. After exactly 6 minutes, the recruit stopped moving. The guards dragged him away to join the first casualty. 198 remained. "Processing begins now," Venko said. "You will be stripped of everything from your previous life. You are not soldiers. You are not even trainees. You are numbers until you prove you deserve names." She gestured toward a structure leaking chemical smells. "Inside. Move." We moved. My hands were shaking. I forced them still. The processing facility was dim, lit by failing lumens that flickered and buzzed. The air was thick with counterseptic that burned my lungs, but didn't mask the smell of burned flesh and concentrated fear sweat. Servitors moved with mechanical efficiency, stripping recruits of clothing and possessions. Everything went into incinerators. No exceptions, no mementos, no past. I watched my worn farming clothes, the only physical connection to Verdun 3, to my family, to who I'd been. disappear into flames. Something broke inside, but I kept my face still. Around me, others cried openly. The servitors didn't care. The branding came next. Each recruit held by guards, while a servitor applied a thermal brand to the left shoulder. Their trainee number. It wasn't ceremonial. It was utilitarian, like marking livestock. When my turn came, the guards forced me into position. The brand descended. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, flesh burning, nerves screaming, the smell of my own meat cooking. I didn't scream. I wouldn't give them that. The servitor held it for exactly 3 seconds that felt like hours, then withdrew. The number 73 was burned into my shoulder in clean lines. "Trainee 73, the servitor intoned, and moved on. Behind me, someone laughed. Not hysterical laughter, genuine amusement. I turned and saw her, lean, angular, covered in old scars that formed words I couldn't quite read. She was grinning at the servitor as the brand touched her shoulder. "That's the best you got," she said through her teeth. "Try the underhive sometime. We use heat worse than that for fun." The guards looked uncertain. She was branded Trainee 92 and still laughing as they moved her along. She caught my eye and winked. "Name's Yenna," she said. "You don't scream either. Good sign." Then she was gone into the next processing stage. Near the branding station, a smaller recruit prayed continuously through his turn. "Emperor, protect thy servant. Make me strong in thy service. Let this pain be thy test." The brand came down. He kept praying, voice rising but never breaking into screams. "Thank you for this trial. Thank you for this blessing. Thank you." He was branded Trainee 127. When the servitor released him, he was still praying, tears streaming but voice steady. His voice was beautiful despite the pain, musical in a way that seemed impossible given the circumstances. I caught fragments of his backstory from whispered conversations. Former ecclesiarchy choir boy, conscripted for unspecified moral failures. His faith seemed genuine. I wondered how long it would last on Catachan. The largest recruit I'd ever seen was branded next. Enormous, scarred, utterly silent. He didn't react at all when the brand touched his shoulder. No sound, no flinch, nothing. The servitor held it for 3 seconds, then 5, then 7, uncertain. The recruit's face showed no pain, no emotion, no acknowledgement that flesh was charring. When the servitor finally withdrew, the burn was deeper than anyone else's, but the recruit, now Trainee 15, simply walked calmly to the next station. I realized I hadn't heard this man speak once since we'd landed. Even the guards gave him extra distance. They were unnerved by someone who didn't register pain. Processing continued. We were issued basic fatigues, a training pack, a training knife that looked like a toy compared to the Catachan fangs the natives carried. Within 2 hours, 200 individuals had become numbered meat. I touched my brand, still hot, throbbing, Trainee 73. I tried to remember my name under the number. Darren Combe, farmer's son, survivor. I repeated it silently like a prayer. Night fell. We were dismissed to barracks that were sweltering, airless, filled with sounds of crying, and praying and desperate attempts at sleep. My brand throbbed. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing the recruit convulsing from poisoned water, the flames consuming my family's clothes. I slipped outside, seeking air, finding none. The night air was as thick as the days. The camp was different at night. Darker than any darkness I'd known on Verdun 3. The lumens were spaced far apart, creating pools of shadow. And the jungle sounds. They had purpose. Not random animal noises, but calls and responses, patterns, hunting patterns. I walked toward the camp's center where something was chiming. The memorial grove. A single tree dominated the clearing. Native Catachan species, massive, its bark textured wrong, like scales or skin. Hanging Hanging from every branch were dog tags. Thousands of them, each one a trainee who had died during selection. They chimed constantly in what might have been wind, creating a sound like mechanical rain, like tiny metal voices crying out. I approached and saw names, numbers, dates. Some tags were recent, within the last month. Some were decades old, metal thinning. I touched one tag and froze. The bark had grown over parts of it. The tree was eating them, consuming the metal. The dead were literally being devoured by their memorial. 13,417, a voice said behind me. That's how many tags are on this tree, updated weekly. I spun. A younger man in instructor fatigue stood there. Corporal insignia, native Catachan, but less scarred than the others. Corporal Thresh, he said. Don't worry, you're not in trouble. Can't sleep? His tone was almost conversational. The tree's a scav oak, native species, extracts minerals from soil, or anything else with metal content. They hang the tags because, he paused, because the chiming keeps certain predators away. Most of the time. The way he said most of the time sounded like a warning. Get some sleep, 73. Tomorrow, the real training starts. He walked away, then paused. Oh, I'd avoid the north perimeter at night. The fence has some weak sections. Wouldn't want anyone wandering out accidentally. The way he said it sounded like he was trying to prevent exactly that. I stood alone in the grove after he left. 13,417 dead trainees. Decades of selection programs, each one killing the majority of its recruits. 200 had arrived today. If the pattern held, 140 would join this tree. I looked at the tags and tried to imagine each one as a person, someone's son, daughter, someone who'd once had a name before they became a number. I touched my brand. 73. Would my tag hang here in 10 weeks, slowly being consumed? The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt numbly determined. My family's bodies had been consumed by tyrannids. If I died here, at least the consumption would be slower. At least I'd fight first. It wasn't much of a prayer, but it was all I had. I turned to return to the barracks. The tags chimed behind me, constant and musical and wrong. Then I heard it. One of the chiming sounds was off rhythm, coming from beyond the north perimeter where Thresh had warned me away from. Something in the jungle was mimicking the sound of metal on metal, testing, probing. I froze and watched. An instructor on patrol heard it too. The instructor simply made a note on a data slate and continued walking, unconcerned. Whatever was out there, learning to sound like our memorial, was expected, was part of the plan. My blood went cold as I understood. The tree didn't just memorialize the dead, it helped select the next ones. By the third day, I had learned to check my boots for finger spiders, my water for larvae, and my bunkmates for breathing. 2 of them had stopped during the night. No one had heard a thing. Morning formation revealed the bodies, dragged out by Thresh and another corporal, faces peaceful, no visible wounds. The instructors didn't explain. Venko simply walked down our lines, counted us with those flat eyes, and marked her data slate. 198. We'd lost 12 since arrival. Training ground Delta, she whispered. Conditioning run. Move. We moved. The training ground was a cleared corridor through dense jungle, 200 meters of relatively open space bordered by walls of vegetation that seemed to lean inward. Razor ferns lined both sides, serrated leaves as long as my forearm, edges weeping clear fluid that might have been sap or venom. Probably both. At the far end, Venko stood beside monitoring equipment, a chronometer in her hand. But it was what hung in the air at chest height that made my stomach clench. Yellow-green fog, perfectly still, forming a discrete layer that cut the corridor in half horizontally. Spore cloud. I'd heard about them during the briefings on the transport. Fungal colonies that reproduced by releasing airborne spores dense enough to see. The briefing had mentioned they were locally hazardous. The way the instructors positioned themselves upwind suggested the briefing had understated things. "Spore run," Venko said, her whisper somehow carrying. 200 meters. Acceptable time is under 40 seconds. You will hold your breath for the duration. She held up the chronometer. "I'll be timing you, not to see if you make it, to document how you fail." A trainee 3 positions down, young, maybe 19, raised his hand. "What about filters, Sergeant?" Venko looked at him with those dead eyes. "This is Catachan. The enemy doesn't provide filters. Neither do we." She gestured at the spore cloud. "Those who breathe will discover why within 6 hours. Questions?" No one spoke. "First group, forward." 10 trainees stepped to the line. I was in the 3rd group, positioned between Yenna and a large trainee I didn't know. Maxon was 2 rows back, prayer beads wrapped around his fist. Braca stood at the edge of formation, massive and silent, watching everything. The first group took their breaths and ran. I watched them disappear into the yellow-green fog at chest height, only their legs visible below it. Torsos vanished. Some made it through in 35 seconds, bursting out the other side gasping. Others faltered at the halfway point. I saw the moment they broke, the desperate inhalation, the immediate choking. One trainee panicked at 100 meters, tried to turn back, stumbled sideways into the razor ferns. His scream was brief. The ferns cut deep, and whatever they wept wasn't sap. Venko made a note on her data slate. "Second group." I filled my lungs, tasting the copper-rot air that passed for breathable on this world. My heart hammered against my ribs. 200 meters, 40 seconds. Simple mathematics that might kill me. "Third group, move." I ran. The spore cloud hit at 5 meters. Suddenly, I was chest-deep in yellow-green fog that clung like cobwebs, warm and wrong against my skin. My eyes stung immediately. I kept them barely slitted, watching the ground, counting in my head. 1, 2, 3. The burn in my lungs started at 15 seconds. 4, 5, 6. At 20 seconds, the burn became fire. 7, 8. I could see other trainees in my peripheral vision, distorted through the spores. One of them stumbled. 9, 10. The temptation to breathe was overwhelming, instinctive, my body screaming that I was drowning in air. 11, 12. Halfway point. The trainee beside me, the large one, took a breath. I heard the intake, heard the immediate wet choking. 13. 14. Don't look. Keep moving. 15. 16. My vision started spotting. 17. 18. The edge of the fog visible ahead. 19. 20. I burst through at 38 seconds and collapsed, gasping, lungs burning, but clean air filling them. Clean by Catachan standards, anyway. I looked back through the fog. Shapes still moving inside it. Then one went still. Venko walked past me, chronometer in hand, stylus scratching on her data slate. She didn't look at the gasping survivors. She was watching the fog, waiting to see who else would fail. By the time all groups finished, 6 trainees hadn't made it. 4 had breathed the spores. 2 had panicked into the razor ferns. The bodies were collected with the same efficiency as the morning's dead. Noted, documented, removed. 192. 6 hours later, during evening rations, I learned what breathing spores meant. A trainee 3 bunks from mine started coughing, wet, productive, wrong-sounding. He coughed into his hand, and it came away with blood and something else. White filaments, thread-thin, moving slightly against his palm like the legs of drowning insects. He stared at them with an expression of dawning horror that I'll never forget. The fungal colony had established in his lungs. Now it was fruiting. Venko appeared as if summoned, examined his hand briefly, made a detailed note. Spore germination in 6 hours. Notation for the botanical teams. She walked away. The trainee would die within 3 days. Everyone knew it. No one spoke of it. What was there to say? That night I lay in my bunk listening to his breathing grow progressively worse, each inhalation sounding more like drowning, and did the mathematics. 38 seconds. I'd made it in 38 seconds. 2 seconds slower, and those filaments would be in my lungs right now, threading through tissue, spreading roots, preparing to fruit. 2 seconds, 2 heartbeats. That was the margin between survival and becoming an incubator for something that would consume me from within. I thought of Verdun the Thrar. 3 weeks in the grain silos. Perfect stillness. Hiding had been simpler. Here, you had to move, act, risk, and every action might be the one that killed you. There was no safety in stillness. Something metallic slid under the barracks door. I waited, listening. Footsteps retreated. After 5 minutes of silence, I retrieved it, a simple filter mask, military issue, and a note with one word: tomorrow. I recognized the handwriting from equipment manifests, Thresh. I hid the mask in my gear and tried to sleep. Failed. Sometime after midnight, the infected trainee's breathing stopped. In the morning, his bunk was empty, his tags destined for the Memorial Grove. 191. The testing swamp, Venko announced at dawn formation. Submersion exercise. 3 minutes minimum, 5 minutes commendable. The swamp was 30 meters from camp, a cordoned section of stagnant water, the color of old bruises, thick with algae that formed mats on the surface. Monitoring equipment surrounded it. Chronometers, data slate stations, medical scanners, but no medical personnel, only instructors with recording devices. The smell hit me from 10 meters away. Copper rot intensified, organic decay, and something chemical that didn't quite mask the biological wrongness underneath. The water looked thick, wrong, like it had texture beyond liquid. We lined up in groups of 10 at the water's edge. My group included Yenna, Maxon, and, I noticed with something like relief, Braca. The giant's presence felt reassuring, even though he'd never spoken a word. "You will submerge completely," Venko whispered. 3 minutes minimum. Surface when you must. Those who surface early demonstrate poor discipline. Those who surface late. She paused. The water contains native parasitic organisms. They enter through tear ducts and nostrils at approximately the 3-minute mark. Your ability to surface before infestation demonstrates combat-relevant judgment. A trainee behind me asked, "What happens if we refuse?" Venko turned those flat eyes on him. "Then you've demonstrated poor judgment and are unsuitable for further training. Corporal Thresh will escort you to alternative assignment." We all knew what that meant. There were no alternative assignments on Catachan, only the jungle. Maxon's prayer beads clicked faster. "The Emperor protects," he whispered. "The Emperor protects." Yenna laughed, brittle, too loud. "Sure he does. That's why we're about to dunk ourselves in parasite soup." First group, enter the water. 10 trainees waded in. The water reached chest height. They looked at each other, at Venko, at the chronometers. Then, on her signal, they submerged. I watched the surface. The algae mats barely disturbed. Just 10 sets of ripples, then stillness. The chronometers counted. At 2 minutes, the first trainee surfaced, gasping. Then 3 more in quick succession. At 2:30, another. At 2:40, most of the rest. At 3 minutes, 2 remained under. Venko made a note. At 3:30, 1 surfaced, face pale, water streaming. At 4 minutes, the last surfaced, face down, floating. Instructors pulled him out. His eyes were open. Water streamed from his nose and mouth, but there was something else in the water. tiny, translucent shapes, wriggling. Venko examined him with clinical precision. 4 minutes, 16 seconds. Commendable commitment. She made a detailed note on her data slate. The trainee was dead. The larvae were already inside him. Second group, enter the water. I waded in. The temperature was blood warm. The algae touched my skin like dead fingers, leaving residue. I took the deepest breath my lungs could hold and submerged. Underwater, the world became murky darkness. Visibility, maybe 2 meters, shapes moving in the periphery that might have been plant matter or something worse. The burn started in my lungs at 1 minute. I forced myself still, conserving oxygen. At 2 minutes, the burn became agony. My discipline held. At 2:30, every instinct screamed to surface. I counted seconds. 2:40, 2:45. I broke the surface gasping, vision spotting, lungs screaming. I looked left. The large trainee surfaced at 2:50. I looked right. Empty water. Still. At 3 minutes, nothing. At 3:30, Venko made a note. At 4 minutes, the trainee from my right surfaced face down. They pulled him out. He was younger than me, maybe 17. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. And in his nose, barely visible but definitely there, white thread-like shapes moving inward. Venko leaned close, examining the entry point. Larvae entry via nasal passage at approximately 3 minutes 40 seconds. Excellent data. She congratulated the corpse. I sat wrapped in a thermal blanket despite the heat, doing the mathematics. 2:45, acceptable. 3 minutes, commended. 4 minutes, lethal. The window between success and death was 75 seconds. And the instructors knew exactly where that window was. They'd done this test hundreds of times. They knew the larvae's timing. They chose not to warn anyone. This wasn't training. It was documentation of exactly how much punishment a human could survive before crossing into death. That evening, Yenna found me near the water distribution point. She was quieter than usual, the manic edge absent. You surfaced at 2:45, she said. Smart. What was your time? 2:30. I've got practice knowing when to quit before things get worse. She paused. The kid next to you, I saw his face before they took him. He was smiling underwater, like he thought if he stayed down long enough, it'd prove something. Another pause. Can't prove anything if you're dead. It was the first time I'd heard her sound genuinely tired. Later, behind the equipment shed where the surveillance had a blind spot. Thresher's doing. I suspected. Yenna found me again. This time she moved with purpose. You know why I laugh all the time? She asked. Before I could answer, in the underhive, if you showed fear, you became property. If you showed pain, you became entertainment. But if you laughed, if you acted like nothing could touch you, sometimes they'd leave you alone. Sometimes. She paused. It worked until it didn't. Then I became property anyway. She turned around and lifted her shirt. Her back was covered in scars, deliberate, precise, forming letters and numbers. Brand marks, gang sigils, tallies, the words, property, lot 7, paid. Each one a violation recorded in scar tissue, an archive of dehumanization written on skin. I stared, unable to find words. She lowered her shirt and turned back. Her eyes were dry but hard. I came to Catachan because the Munitorum doesn't ask questions about underhive refugees. They just need bodies. She looked toward the jungle. At least here, the scars I earn will be mine. Not given, not bought. Earned. I understood then what drove her, the desperate need to reclaim agency, to choose her own damage. I hid while my family died, I said quietly. 3 weeks in grain silos while tyrannids consumed Verdun 3. Sometimes I think I'm still hiding, that all of this is just more elaborate concealment. She looked at me for a long moment. Then stop hiding. Fight or die, but do it standing up. As we returned to the barracks, I noticed Braca standing about 20 meters away, partially obscured by supply crates. His journal was in his hands. Our eyes met. He didn't pretend he hadn't been watching, didn't hide that he'd been listening. He simply closed the journal, tucked it away, and walked off without a sound. We'd been catalogued, assessed, recorded. The question was, had we passed whatever test he was administering? The next day, a navigation exercise through the jungle, groups of 10 moving through marked routes, learning to identify hazards. The jungle here was dense enough that groups lost sight of each other within meters. Razor-barked trees wept acidic sap. Carnivorous vines hung from branches like nooses. Thresh had marked the safer paths with subtle signs. A broken branch here, a specific leaf arrangement there. Most trainees didn't notice. Yenna's sharp eyes caught them. We followed. A trainee from another group, visible about 15 meters away through the vegetation, brushed against a brain leaf plant. Broad leaves with fine hair-like tendrils, almost beautiful, growing in shade. The contact was brief. He didn't notice. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then his expression changed. Not pain, not fear, peaceful confusion. He stopped walking. His group called to him. He didn't respond. He turned slowly and began walking in a different direction, movements smooth and calm, purposeful. His group tried to stop him. He walked through them, not aggressive, just unstoppable. Venko and 2 other instructors appeared immediately, data slates ready. The infected trainee walked steadily toward a known hazard marked on training maps. Barking toad nest. The toads were amphibians the size of combat boots, highly territorial, skin secreting contact neurotoxin. A single toad could kill in minutes. The nest had dozens. Everyone knew where he was going. Everyone knew what would happen. A trainee from his group tried to physically intervene. Venko intercepted. "Do not interfere. This is a learning opportunity." The infected trainee reached the nest. The toads perceived threat and swarmed. He didn't run, didn't fight, just stood there, that peaceful, confused expression on his face while they covered him. The neurotoxin worked in seconds. He fell. Venko made detailed notes. Brain leaf infection results in complete motor override. Subject demonstrated no pain response or survival instinct. Time to lethality, 43 seconds. Infection vector confirmed as dermal contact with dorsal leaf surface. She was documenting an execution. After the body was removed, she addressed us. Brain leaf is native to 47% of Catachan's jungle terrain. Infection is instant upon contact. Motor control is hijacked within 10 minutes. The plant directs infected organisms toward predators who will kill the host, whose decomposition feeds the plant's root system. There is no treatment. Avoidance is your only defense. She paused. The subject provided valuable data on infection progression. His death serves the Imperium's knowledge base. Maxon made a sound, half sob, half laugh. "The Emperor protects," he said, but it sounded like a question. Venko looked at him. "The Emperor provides enemies to test you. Protection is your own responsibility." That night, very late, something metallic slid under the barracks door. I waited until footsteps retreated, then retrieved it. An older model data slate showing a personnel roster. 200 entries, each with trainee number, origin world, and a percentage. Survival probability. I scanned the list. 12 entries marked deceased. Others showed percentages. Green above 60, yellow 40 to 60, red below 40. My entry, trainee 73, Darren Colm, Verdun 3, 23%. Red, very red, Yenna 31%, Maxon 19%, Braca 87%. Then I saw the annotation. Next to my percentage, someone had written in a different hand, Hider. I tapped to expand. The full note appeared. Verdun. 3 survival suggests either exceptional concealment skills or freeze response to overwhelming threat. Catachan selection will determine which. High probability of repeat paralysis under stress. Recommend observation during first contact scenario. They knew about the grain silos, about 3 weeks in darkness while my family was consumed. It was in my file. Noted. Flagged. They weren't just training me. They were testing a hypothesis about what kind of coward I was. I returned the slate near the door. Thresh would retrieve it before morning inspection. I returned to my bunk and stared at the ceiling, listening to the Memorial Grove's constant chiming. They thought I was a hider. They were watching to see if I'd freeze again. So when the moment came, when the test arrived designed to make me break, I'd force myself through it, not because I believed I could, because I refused to let them be right about me, even if it killed me, especially if it killed me. Better to die fighting than prove them right. Dawn broke. The spore-infected trainee had died in the night. His tags were removed for the Memorial Grove. Training continued, but something in me had changed. The next test was coming, and this time, I wouldn't hide. The jungle went silent at 347 hours. Not quiet, silent. Every insect, every bird thing, every rustle of predatory vegetation stopped at once, as if the entire forest had drawn a breath and held it. I was on watch, 4th hour of my shift, and the sudden absence of sound hit like physical pressure against my eardrums. Around the perimeter, other trainees froze mid-motion, weapons half raised, eyes wide in the darkness. A veteran from some hive world whose name I'd never learned whispered across the clearing, Emperor's Mercy, something big is hunting. The silence held for 30 seconds. Then gradually, cautiously, sound returned, but wrong. Too careful, too measured, as if every living thing in the canopy was holding perfectly still, hoping not to be noticed. I'd been in the field 3 days. 3rd day of a 5-day patrol through what the maps called Devil Territory, though nobody had explained what that meant. My flak jacket was soaked through with sweat that never dried, the webbing cutting into shoulders still raw from the last exercise. The last gun in my hands felt heavier than it had at dawn. But I was here, present, aware, not frozen. 3 weeks since I'd found that roster. 3 weeks of pushing myself past every limit, forcing myself into situations that made my pulse spike and my vision narrow. I'd gotten better at managing the freeze response, better at the breathing exercises, better at recognizing the warning signs before paralysis took hold. Exercises weren't real, though, and whatever had just silenced an entire square kilometer of Catachan jungle was very, very real. Morning broke reluctantly through the canopy, gray light filtering through layers of green so vivid it hurt to look at. We broke camp in tense silence. Maxon tried to start one of his hymns, "The Emperor's Eyes Are Upon Us," and his voice came out surprisingly steady. Beautiful, even. A few others joined in ragged harmony. The singing helped, made the jungle feel slightly less like it was digesting us. Yenna walked beside me, keeping rhythm with the hymn but not singing. Her usual manic energy was muted this morning, eyes scanning the undergrowth with the paranoid efficiency she'd learned in Necromunda's underhive. "Choir boy's voice is wasted on prayers," she muttered. "Could have made a fortune in the underhive pleasure dens." "You trying to get Maxon to punch you? Just seeing if he's still in there." She glanced at me. "Faith's a good shield until something gets through it." "What got through yours?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Everything, farm boy, everything." Brucker took point position without being asked. Watching him move was like watching smoke flow through dense undergrowth, his massive bulk somehow gliding between brainleaf groves and toxic vines without disturbing anything. He tested each step before committing weight, reading the jungle in ways I was only beginning to understand. He watched where insects landed, followed the flow of fungal growth, moved with the jungle's rhythm instead of against it. I tried to learn from it, tried to understand how something that large could be that quiet. During a brief rest, I studied the map Corporal Thresh had distributed. Standard patrol route, standard markings, but in the right light, I could see faint pencil marks, barely visible additions that weren't on the official briefing. Equipment cache locations, water sources, and one circled notation, barking toad nest, give 50 mulch to clearance. Thresh had been guiding us, steering us away from the worst dangers, risking himself to keep us alive. I looked up and found him watching me. He gave the slightest shake of his head. Don't acknowledge it. Don't get us both killed. I folded the map. By 1400 hours, we'd made excellent time. Too good, I realized. Thresh's hidden guidance was working. We were ahead of schedule, deeper into unmarked territory than planned. Thresh called a halt for meal break in a small clearing centered on a fallen tree. Decent sight lines, defensible position, good choice. I settled against the tree trunk, forcing down a ration bar that tasted like recycled cardboard and chemical preservatives. A trainee named Kosh dropped beside me. Older, maybe 30, with hard eyes that had seen combat before this place. "You did agricultural work before this?" he asked. I nodded, mouth full of ration bar. "Good." He broke his own ration in half, offering me a piece. "Farmers understand that sometimes the harvest fails. Remember that." Before I could ask what he meant, Braka stood, his hand raised for silence. The jungle had gone quiet again. The attack came from angles that shouldn't have been possible, above and behind simultaneously. Vasquez, our point man who'd been 20 meters ahead scouting, appeared in the clearing, not walking, flying. His torso landed separately from his legs. The cut was so clean I could see the cross-section of his spine, his organs, the inside of his body laid bare like a medical diagram. He was still alive for 2 heartbeats. His mouth worked soundlessly, then his eyes went vacant. Nobody had heard the strike. Nobody had seen the approach. Vasquez was simply in pieces, steaming in the humid air. Chaos erupted. Trainees scattered in every direction, exactly the wrong response. Thresh screamed for formation, but panic drowned his voice. Braka didn't run. He positioned himself at the fallen tree, weapon raised, scanning the canopy with mechanical precision. Maxon dropped to his knees, prayers spilling from his lips in mindless repetition. Yenna grabbed my arm, trying to pull me toward the cover, but I saw it. Movement in the trees 40 meters out. Not movement, presence. The Catachan devil, partially visible through foliage. Compound eyes like polished obsidian. Each one the size of my fist, multifaceted, reflecting fractured images of the clearing. Mandibles that looked industrial. Cutting tools designed by something that understood efficiency and nothing else. A body that was all edges and joints bent at anatomically impossible angles. Chitin the color of old blood. And those limbs. Emperor's mercy, those limbs. Razor-edged. Too many. Moving with liquid grace that suggested they could be anywhere. Cut through anything, faster than thought. The compound eyes. I was 16 again. Verdun V, the grain silo. Watching through cracks in the corrugated metal as Hormagaunts tore through the processing facility. Those same multifaceted eyes. My mother in the grain bins, and the creature finding her. She didn't scream. The claws were too fast for screaming. She just came apart, reduced from a person to biological components in seconds. The sounds. Oh, throne, the sounds. Wet tearing, meat from bone. The chittering communication as they fed, as they processed her. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My legs locked, my vision tunneled. The present bled into the past until I couldn't tell which was real. Freeze and maybe it won't notice. Maybe it will take someone else. Maybe 73. Move. Move now. Kosh was sprinting toward me. His face showed perfect clarity. He knew exactly what he was doing, exactly what it would cost. He reached me, grabbed my webbing, started dragging me backward. The devil's attention shifted. Its entire body reoriented with mechanical precision, compound eyes focusing, head tilting to track movement. It moved, not fast, faster, 40 meters in 2 heartbeats. Kosh saw it coming, knew he couldn't reach cover, and did something I'll carry forever. He shoved me, hard enough to send me sprawling toward the fallen tree. Then he turned, faced the devil, weapon raised, buying seconds. His last gun fired 3 times. The bolts hit chitin and scorched black marks into blood-red armor. The devil didn't slow. One razored limb punched through Kosh's chest, lifted him off the ground. He stared down at the blade emerging from his sternum. His legs kicked twice, then the devil's mandibles opened, wider than anatomy should allow, and closed over his head. The feeding sounds began, wet tearing, crunching cartilage, the slurping of fluids being consumed, mechanical efficiency, purpose-built consumption. Kosh's legs kicked once more, then stopped. The devil fed for 5 seconds, an eternity. Then it dropped what remained and turned toward the fleeing trainees. What hit the ground wasn't recognizable as human anymore. Yenna appeared in front of me, blocking my view. She slapped me, hard enough to snap my head sideways, hard enough to leave my cheek burning. "Farm boy, not here, not now. Move or join him." Her voice cut through 16 years and 3 weeks in the space between present and past. Awareness crashed back into my body like ice water. I saw her eyes, wild with fear but still focused, still present. She grabbed my arm and ran, dragged me the first few steps until my legs remembered their purpose. Behind us, screams echoed through the jungle. Some cut short, some continued too long. I ran beside Yenna while my mind replayed 5 seconds. Kosh's eyes meeting mine as the blade punched through. He knew he was dying, and he did it anyway. Because I froze. We ran until the sounds faded, found survivors gathering at a pre-designated rally point, a rocky outcrop with clear sight lines. Braca was there, weapon still raised, Maxon bleeding from a head wound, muttering prayers without inflection, Thresh doing a head count. 9 remained from 16, 7 dead or missing. We huddled at the outcrop as dusk approached. Nobody spoke. Maxon's prayers had become mechanical, words without meaning, ritual without faith. Yenna sat apart, her laughter completely absent. She stared at nothing. Braca cleaned his weapon with ritualistic precision, the only one who seemed functionally calm. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept seeing Kosh's eyes. Sergeant Venko appeared from the tree line. None of us had heard her approach. She carried a data slate and showed no signs of exertion or concern. When she looked at us, it was with the clinical assessment of a butcher evaluating livestock. 7 casualties, she whispered. Her voice somehow carried perfect authority despite its softness. Acceptable parameters for this phase. She paused. Let that sink in. The Catachan Devil has maintained territory in Grid Square 774 for approximately 8 months. This information was available in your briefing materials, page 47, subsection 3. Silence. Nobody had turned to page 47. She'd known we wouldn't. Your patrol route was designed to intersect devil hunting grounds at 1400 hours, optimal feeding time. The purpose was assessment of response to overwhelming force and evaluation of leadership emergence under apex threat conditions. One of the trainees, someone who'd run, started to protest. You sent us into a killing ground. Venko's response was barely audible. Yes, the enemy won't schedule around your readiness. Neither will I. Her eyes found me. Trainee 73, report your actions during the engagement. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. She wanted a tactical analysis. She wanted me to admit I froze. Wanted me to prove the roster right. 23%. Haida. Kosh died because of me. Before I could speak, Braka made a sound. Not words, a low growl that drew every eye. He looked at Venko, then deliberately placed his hand on my shoulder. Solidarity so unexpected it froze the moment. Yenna stood flanking my other side. Even Maxon looked up from his prayers. Venko observed this with something that might have been satisfaction. Interesting. Tribal bonding under stress, protective formation for compromised unit member, adaptive behavior. She made a note on her data slate. Then her eyes met mine again. For just a moment, something almost human flickered there. You froze, 73. Someone died because of it. You can let that define you, or you can let it forge you. Choose quickly. We have 2 more days in Devil territory, and it knows we're here now. She turned to leave, paused. Trainee Kosh's actions are noted. He will be remembered. It was the closest thing to compassion I'd heard from her. Somehow, it made everything worse. Night fell. Thresh organized watch rotation. We huddled closer than tactically necessary, seeking proximity as comfort. I volunteered for first watch, couldn't face sleep and the dreams it would bring. Yenna joined me without being asked, sat close enough our shoulders touched. She didn't speak. For once, no nervous laughter, no gallows humor, just silence and the weight of her presence. We sat listening to the jungle's night sounds resume. The devil was out there. Kosh was out there too. What was left of him? Tomorrow, we'd have to go back into the green hell, back into devil territory. Let it define you, or let it forge you. I didn't know which was happening. I just knew I couldn't freeze again, couldn't let anyone else die because I was trapped in the past. I had to become something else, something harder, something that doesn't hide. The watch changed. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Across the camp, illuminated by bioluminescent moss, Braka sat writing in his journal. His face was peaceful, meditative. The act of writing seemed to center him. I watched him, wondering what thoughts occupied that silent mind. As if sensing my attention, he looked up. Our eyes met across 20 meters. He held my gaze for several seconds. Then deliberately, slowly, he wrote something in the journal. He turned the book around, held it up so the blue-green light illuminated the page. Even at distance, the writing was clear, large, bold, meant to be read. I stood, walked closer, read the message. Your freeze will kill more than Kosh. Master it or I will remove you myself. I read it 3 times. Remove, not help, not train, remove. The implication was clear. Braka would kill me if I remained a liability, but it wasn't said with cruelty. It was stated as simple fact, the way one might discuss maintaining a weapon or repairing equipment. I looked from the page to his face, saw no hostility there, only assessment, only judgment still in progress. Braka closed the journal slowly, deliberately, then returned to silence. But his eyes remained on me, waiting, watching, judging whether the farm boy who became a hider would become something else, or needed to be removed before he got more people killed. I nodded once. Acknowledgement, not agreement. Returned to my bedroll. Didn't lie down. Sat watching the jungle and began practicing the breathing exercises. Slow inhale. Hold. Slow exhale. Box breathing to interrupt panic response. I'd practice all night if necessary, because the alternative was Braka making good on that promise. And somehow, that mattered more than Venko's contempt or the devil's hunger. Braka saw me as potentially worth saving. That meant something. That meant I had to become someone worth the effort. The night stretched ahead, full of practice, full of preparation, full of the knowledge that I was being judged. And the verdict wasn't in yet. 2 more days in devil territory. 2 more days to prove I wouldn't freeze again. 2 more days before Braca decided if I was worth keeping alive. I stopped counting the empty bunks after 50. The mathematics of attrition had become background noise, like the chiming of the memorial grove, constant, mechanical, hungry. 6 weeks since arrival, 200 trainees reduced to 89. The numbers scrolled through my mind during every formation, every meal, every moment of silence. 111 dead, 89 remaining. The ratio felt wrong somehow, too precise, too consistent. But I hadn't understood why until later. 3 days since Braca's threat. 3 days of waking at 0300, forcing myself through exposure therapy I didn't have a name for. Just knowing I couldn't freeze again. The equipment shed sat at camp's edge, near enough to the perimeter that jungle sounds filtered through the corroded walls. I'd claimed it as my vigil ground. Red luminator casting everything in blood tones. Salvaged Vox unit playing recordings I'd made during the Devil attack. Chitons scraping metal, mandibles clicking, the wet sounds of feeding. My hands shook. Sweat ran down my face despite the pre-dawn coolness that was Catachan's only mercy. But I didn't freeze. Hadn't frozen for 3 mornings now. Slow inhale, hold, slow exhale. Box breathing to interrupt the panic response. The shed door opened silently. My hand went to my knife before conscious thought registered movement. Reflex improving, instinct sharpening. Yenna stood silhouetted against the marginally lighter darkness outside. She didn't speak, just watched me for a long moment, then entered, closed the door, and sat across from me without asking permission. She'd been watching me do this for days, I realized, waiting to see if I'd break or adapt. You think hiding in a silo was bad? Her voice carried none of its usual manic edge. Try hiding in a corpse starch vat for 3 days. At least grain doesn't scream when it's processed. I stopped the recording. The silence felt enormous. Underhive? I asked. Escher territory, on the edge of the sump. She stared at the red-lit darkness between us. Gang war. I was property. 14 years old, marked as belonging to someone who didn't like losing possessions. When the fighting started, I hid in the only place they wouldn't look. 3 days breathing chemical reek of dissolved bodies. 3 days listening to people I knew being murdered meters away. Her laugh was absent. This was the real Yenna underneath. I learned to make myself small, she continued. To ignore sounds that should make you move, scream, do something, to just stop existing until it's safe again. She met my eyes. We're all hiding from something, 73. Question is whether we're hiding to survive or just hiding because we forgot how to do anything else. I understood then. Her constant laughter was the same thing as my freeze response, a trauma reaction that protected her once and became a cage. We'd both been performing our damage instead of healing it. I'm trying to face it, I said, quietly. Don't know if it's working. It is. She nodded toward the Vox unit. You're still here. Still trying. That's more than most manage. The silence between us felt different than the usual camp quiet. Shared. Understanding. Then something outside laughed with Yenna's voice. High and manic, perfectly reproduced, but hollow, purposeful, coming from the darkness beyond the fence where the perimeter lights didn't reach. Yenna's real breathing beside me suddenly sounded very loud. We sat frozen, genuinely frozen, not trauma response, but survival instinct. The thing outside moved along the perimeter with the distinctive rustle-stop rustle of a predator testing defenses. Every few seconds, another burst of that stolen laughter, getting quieter, moving away. The perimeter lights never triggered. Whatever it was, knew exactly where the sensors ended. We didn't speak until the morning klaxon sounded. Left the shed separately, maintaining the fiction that this meeting never happened. But at breakfast, Yenna caught my eye and nodded once. An alliance had formed, unspoken but real. We'd need it for what was coming. The wash station during morning routine was institutional grimness incarnate. Concrete walls weeping moisture, pipes clanging and shuddering, water the color of rust that had to be filtered and boiled before touching skin. We performed ablutions in silence. Speaking drew attention, and attention from instructors meant training opportunities. Maxon's voice drifted from the far corner. Quiet hymn to himself, one of the few sounds of humanity left in the camp. His singing had become our morning constant, beautiful and fragile, against the mechanical sounds of survival. Then it stopped. I looked up from scrubbing counterseptic across my arms. Maxon stood motionless, staring at something in the corner I couldn't see from my angle. I moved closer. Saw. Trainee 79 sat against the wall with a knife. His wrists were cut, shallow, hesitant lines that bled pink into the standing water. He was praying, not for strength, not for survival, for the Emperor's peace, for permission to stop fighting. His eyes fixed on Maxon with desperate hope. A choir boy, a holy man, someone who could grant the blessing he sought. Please. 79's voice barely reached whisper. I can't. I'm not strong enough for this place. The Emperor has abandoned me, or I've proven unworthy. Either way, the only mercy left is ending. His recitation of the prayer of final release was wrong, stumbling. He didn't even know the proper words. Please don't make me die alone without grace. Maxon's face showed something breaking in real time. His faith had sustained him through 6 weeks of horror, but it couldn't answer this, had no counter-argument that wasn't hollow. There's still hope, Maxon tried. If the Emperor wanted me to survive this, he would have made me stronger. 79's voice carried absolute certainty. This is his answer. Please, make it mean something. The silence stretched. I should have intervened, should have called for an instructor, stopped this somehow. But I stood paralyzed, not by trauma this time, by the terrible understanding that 79 was right. Some of us weren't going to make it, were never going to make it. The only choice left was how we died. Maxon knelt beside him. His voice shook but remained clear as he recited the prayer of final release properly, guiding the trainee through the benediction. Then his hand closed over 79's on the knife. The cut was quick, deep, merciful. 79 died with gratitude in his eyes, finally released from his suffering. Maxon held him until the light faded, then carefully closed his eyes and arranged him in the position of rest. The ritual was completed perfectly, and something inside Maxon broke. I found him later, still washing blood from his hands, scrubbing mechanically long after they were clean. You all right? I asked. He looked at me with hollow eyes. The Emperor protects. That's what I was taught. But he didn't protect that man from me, did he? Or maybe this is his protection. Maybe death is the only mercy left here. His voice was empty. He didn't sing that morning, or the next. The hymns that had sustained him were dying. Punishment detail for being 3 seconds late to formation meant scrubbing floors in the command post. Actual temperature control bringing the air to merely oppressive rather than suffocating. Functioning lumens. Data stations with intact screens. The normalcy felt obscene. The instructors were absent, an unusual opportunity. I was empty-assing a waste receptacle when I saw it. Crumpled document marked with the Munitorum's skull and cog seal. My hand moved before my brain caught up, smoothing it across the floor. Memorandum. Subject. Selection cycle G74, optimal graduation parameters. My eyes caught on specific phrases and couldn't move away. Mortality rate 85% plus 3%. Graduation ceiling 30 individuals, regardless of individual performance metrics. Casualties in excess of parameters indicate insufficient challenge escalation. Casualties below parameters indicate inadequate filtering. The words didn't make sense. Then they made too much sense. It wasn't training. It was industrial processing. We weren't being forged, we were being refined, with 170 lives as acceptable slag. Every death I'd witnessed wasn't an unfortunate necessity. It was a line item. Kosh dying because of my freeze wasn't tragedy. It was progress toward quota. The brain leaf victim, the drowning test casualties, 79's suicide this morning, all anticipated, all acceptable, all built into the system. The instructors weren't trying to make us survive. They were trying to kill exactly 170 of us while making the 30 who remained into something useful. Individual effort couldn't change this. The outcome was predetermined. We weren't fighting for survival. We were competing for 30 slots in a death lottery where the Imperium had already decided 170 losing tickets must be drawn. Boots outside. Instructors returning. I folded the document and concealed it in my boot. Finished the detail mechanically, mind elsewhere. That night, I gathered Yenna and Maxon, then approached Braca, where he sat alone writing by bioluminescent light. The giant looked up, unsurprised by the intrusion. I showed them the document. Yenna read it twice. Her humor died completely. So it doesn't matter. We could be perfect, all of us, and they'd still find ways to kill 170. Maxon's voice was hollow. The Emperor sanctions this. This is his will, enacted through his munitorum. It's not about deserving survival anymore, I said. It's about ensuring the 4 of us are in the 30. Braca reached across and tapped the document, then held up his hand, showing 3 fingers, then pointed to each of us in turn. His meaning was clear. 4 slots. Guaranteed. Whatever it takes. The alliance was sealed in silence. I returned the document the next day during another cleaning detail and discovered a fresh copy in the same waste receptacle. Identical placement. Deliberate. Someone knew I'd taken it, knew I'd read it, knew I'd shared it, and they'd left confirmation. Yes, this is real. Yes, we know you know. Yes, it changes nothing. The cruelty wasn't just the quota. It was the revelation of the quota, the psychological weight of knowing, added as another test to see who broke under the knowledge itself. Nowhere was safe. Nothing was private. Even our knowledge was observed and measured. Emergency formation at 1900 hours. The 89 surviving trainees assembled under portable lumens that cast harsh shadows and attracted night insects that burned against hot elements. Venko stood at the front, posture perfect as always. Beside her, Thresh stood at attention, face unreadable. Between them, a small pile of medical supplies, synthetic skin, wound sealant, broad-spectrum antibiotics. Standard issue for instructors. Forbidden to trainees without authorization, the scene was staged for a lesson. Corporal Thresh has been found stealing from instructor medical stores. Venko's whisper forced everyone to lean in, to strain to hear. The supplies were recovered from various locations where trainees might accidentally find them. This constitutes sabotage of the training program, artificially improving trainee survival rates, disrupting the selection process. She turned to Thresh. Name the trainees you intended to help. Cooperation means severe punishment, but survival. Refusal means execution. Choose. Silence stretched. Thresh's eyes moved across the assembled trainees. He looked directly at me, held my gaze, then Yenna, then Maxon, then Braca. Each of us had received his help, dropped equipment, forgotten med packs, hints about dangerous areas. We all knew it. He knew we knew. His eyes moved on, touching a dozen other faces. Then he looked back to Venko. I name myself. No trainees were aware of my actions. I acted alone. The corruption was mine only. Venko nodded, unsurprised. So you choose execution. Accepted. She drew her bolt pistol and fired once at point-blank range. Thresh's head snapped back and he dropped without ceremony, without last words, without drama. Just a man standing, then a body on the ground. Venko ensured every trainee saw the wound, the finality, the mechanical simplicity of death. She gestured and servitors emerged to remove the body. Within 2 minutes, Thresh was gone. Only a dark stain remained. He died because he forgot what we're making you into. Venko's whisper carried across the silent formation. Soldiers don't need kindness. They need to survive what's coming. She paused. Something shifted in that pause. The final trial begins in 72 hours. You have that long to decide if you want to live. Not to prepare, to decide. As if wanting it might not be enough, as if what we'd face might make death preferable. As she dismissed the formation and walked away, I noticed something impossible. Her hands were trembling, just slightly, but visible. The instructor who had killed without hesitation, who executed Thresh with perfect calm, who had carved a scar on her arm for every trainee she'd personally killed. Her hands shook. She was afraid. Not of us, not of the jungle, of what was coming in 72 hours. The woman who had survived 30 years of Catachan, who treated death as routine maintenance, was afraid of something, and whatever it was worse than anything we'd encountered so far. That night, we gathered in silence. Maxon didn't pray. Yenna didn't laugh. Braca wrote in his journal, then showed us a page. A sketch of Thresh's face, rendered with remarkable skill and compassion. Beneath it, a single word: remembered. We each touched the page in turn, a ritual, a promise. Thresh wouldn't just be another number consumed by the Memorial Grove's hungry tree. In 72 hours, we'd face whatever made Venko's hands tremble. But tonight, we remembered the man who chose to die rather than betray us. It was the last piece of humanity we could afford before becoming what the system demanded. Dawn came red through the morning mist. The countdown had begun. There were 3 days left to prepare. It wouldn't be enough. Murder came to the barracks on the second night. Not from the jungle, from the bunk 3 meters away, where trainee 41 decided his odds were better if trainee 42 stopped breathing. I heard it happen in the darkness. The wet puncture of a blade finding flesh between ribs. The abbreviated gasp, cut short before it could become a scream. The thrashing that lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then the liquid stillness that meant someone had just stopped being a person and become a problem to dispose of. The quality of silence that followed wasn't shock. It was calculation. Other trainees were awake. I could tell by their breathing patterns, the subtle shifts of weight on bunks, the total absence of sleep sounds. They were listening, deciding. Should they help the victim? Help the killer? Neither. No one moved. I counted 47 heartbeats, my own, hammering against my ribs before the scrape of dead weight being dragged across metal grating broke the silence. The sound carved through the darkness like fingernails on slate. Then the clang of the disposal chute opening, the rush of humid jungle air flooding in with its rot-sweet smell, and the distant splash far below where something waited to consume the evidence. 47 trainees 2 hours ago, 46 now. 30 must survive. 16 more must die. I did the mathematics automatically, hating myself for it. 46 people in these barracks. 16 murders spread over 72 hours. Someone dies every 4.5 hours on average. I checked my chronometer. 02:37 hours. The next murder should occur around, give or take. The fact I could think this way meant something in me had already broken. Movement in the darkness. I tensed until I recognized Yenna's silhouette. She moved like she'd learned in the underhive, each footstep placed with absolute precision to avoid noise. She crossed to my bunk first, then to Maxon's, then gestured toward Braca's massive form 3 meters away. She was establishing line of sight between our positions, creating a defensive formation. She leaned close enough that I felt her breath against my ear. 4-hour watch rotations, starting now. Sleep when it's not your turn, or don't sleep at all, but we stay breathing. Bracca's silhouette nodded once in the darkness. Maxon made a sound that might have been agreement or suppressed prayer. We were forming a pact while around us. Others were forming different calculations. The creak of bunks being repositioned carried through the barracks as others reached similar conclusions. Alliances solidifying, prey identifying predators, the mathematics of survival being worked out in real time. I took first watch, sitting up with my back against the cold metal wall, a sharpened piece of composite gripped in my hand. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. My eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, picking out shapes, movement, the subtle shifts that meant someone was awake and watching. At 6:51 hours, 9 minutes early, another murder. This one I saw. Trainee 33 rose from her bunk with mechanical precision. She crossed 5 meters of open space to Trainee 18's position. No hesitation, no apparent emotion. She picked up his pillow, pressed it down over his face with both hands, and held it there. 18 woke, struggled. His legs kicked, hands clawed at her arms, body arched and twisted, trying to break free. The sounds were muffled, but wet, choking, gasping, the desperate animal noises of someone drowning in air. It took 90 seconds for the thrashing to weaken, another 30 for it to stop completely. 33 held the pillow down 10 seconds more to be certain. Then she calmly returned to her bunk and went to sleep. Within 30 seconds, I heard her breathing even out into genuine rest. She'd done this before. The efficiency, the lack of hesitation, the immediate transition to peaceful sleep, these were the markers of someone for whom killing was routine. She was a murderer before Catachan. The training program just gave her permission to practice her vocation. I didn't move to stop her, didn't call out, didn't raise alarm. I sat there and watched a man die and did nothing. That realization sat in my stomach like spoiled meat. False dawn began to gray the viewports. Yenna spoke at normal volume. No point in whispering anymore. 44 now, maybe 43. Heard something in the washroom an hour ago. Maxon's voice came hollow and automatic. The Emperor protects the faithful. It meant nothing. The words were reflex, a prayer worn smooth by repetition until it was just noise. Yenna's laugh came brittle and sharp. The Emperor's got a funny way of showing it, choir boy. Maybe he's protecting the faithless instead. They're the ones doing the killing. Bracca made a sound deep in his chest. Not quite a growl, not quite agreement, just acknowledgement. We were alive. Others weren't. The mathematics continued. Morning formation revealed the night's toll in empty spaces where bodies should have stood. 44 trainees in the mud. No one acknowledged the missing. Venko walked the line in complete silence, her footsteps the only sound. The mud made wet, sucking noises around her boots, mud that had seen too much blood over too many years. She stopped, turned. Those cold eyes swept across us. Efficient, she said, barely above a whisper. Everyone strained to hear. 14 to go. You have 58 hours. She walked away. The instructors didn't investigate, didn't ask questions, didn't pretend to care. The disposal chute was monitored. They knew exactly how many bodies went through. This was expected, desired, engineered. We were doing exactly what they'd designed the countdown to accomplish. The formation dispersed, and we moved as a unit toward the mess hall, staying in open space where ambush was harder. The mess was nearly empty. Most trainees had stopped eating communally, afraid of being poisoned or outnumbered. We ate in silence, watching approaches. The food tasted like recycled protein and chemical preservatives, but I forced it down. Need calories, need strength, need to survive the next 58 hours. Afterward, we established a defensive position near the latrines. Someone always needed to use the facilities. Moments of vulnerability, that required protection. We'd learned to move as a pack. Maxon went first, while Yenna and I stood guard at the entrance, backs to each other, watching approaches. Braca positioned himself to cover the long sight lines. I didn't see them coming until they were already moving. Trainees 19 and 57, coordinated and fast. 19 had a sharpened piece of metal. 57 carried a pipe. They were going for Maxon because he looked weak, prayed constantly, seemed like he wouldn't fight back. I shouted a warning as they hit the entrance. Yenna moved to intercept, but they'd timed it perfectly. She couldn't reach Maxon before they did. I heard the splash of water, the ring of pipe against tile, Maxon's sharp cry of pain or fear. Then sounds I didn't expect. Maxon fought. 19 got a hand around his throat, and Maxon responded by jamming his thumbs into the attacker's eyes. The scream was inhuman, wet and high, and full of rupture. 57 swung the pipe and Maxon caught it. I heard bone break, his hand, his fingers, but he held on and yanked the trainee off balance. 57 went down into the contaminated water pooling on the latrine floor. Maxon landed on top of him, pressing his face down into 3 centimeters of filthy water. The sounds of drowning are worse than you imagine. Thrashing, choking, the wet, desperate noises of someone trying to breathe liquid. 57's hands clawed at Maxon's arms, at the floor, at nothing. It took 90 seconds. Maxon didn't stop pressing until the body was completely still, then 10 seconds more to be certain. His breathing was harsh, ragged, more animal than human. Braca dealt with 19 while Yenna and I finally reached the latrine. The giant didn't kill. He broke. 19's knife arm bent backward at the elbow with a wet crack. His knee folded sideways with a crunch that made my stomach turn. His jaw dislocated with surgical precision. Each break was calculated, controlled, designed to disable permanently without killing. When Braca finished, 19 was alive but would never threaten anyone again. He crawled away, making sounds that weren't quite words. Braca watched him go, then turned to Maxon and nodded once. Acknowledgement. You survived. You did what was necessary. I helped Maxon up. He was shaking, broken hand cradled against his chest, soaked in filthy water and someone else's blood. His eyes had seen something fundamental break inside himself. "Are you all right?" I asked, knowing it was a stupid question. Maxon looked at me with those hollow eyes. "The Emperor protects." That's what I was taught. His voice was flat, empty of everything that had made it his. But he didn't protect that man from me, did he? He didn't stop my hands. He didn't spare either of us. I tried to respond, but he cut me off. "Don't. I'm alive. That's what matters here. That's all that," starting a hymn by habit, but no sound emerged. He tried again. Nothing. The singing that had defined him since we arrived, that had punctuated every moment of fear and pain with faith, was gone. The silence where his hymns should have been felt like another death. We moved to the memorial grove afterward, seeking the marginal safety of open space. The massive tree stood at the compound's center, its branches heavy with thousands of dog tags. They chimed in the humid wind, a constant mechanical requiem for the dead that never stopped. Sitting beneath it, looking up at all those names being slowly consumed by the bark, the sound became overwhelming. I noticed new tags already hanging. Fresh metal, not yet tarnished. 41, 42, 18. The night's casualties already memorialized and beginning their slow digestion. Yenna spoke, her manic humor completely gone. "I've been watching them, the instructors, tracking who they intervened for and who they let die." She showed us her forearm, marks made with scavenged ink since paper wasn't permitted. Names, numbers, causes of death, patterns. They don't care about strength. Half the physically strongest trainees are dead. They don't care about skills. Some of the best survivalists got taken by accidents that could have been prevented. She looked at each of us. "What they care about is this. Who freezes when ordered to let someone die, and who doesn't? She pointed back toward the latrines. Maxon passed their test. So did you, Darren, when you stood there calculating murder rates instead of trying to stop them. And Braca, she looked at the giant. Braca passed before we even got here. Didn't you? Braca didn't nod. Didn't need to. His silence was confirmation. I processed this, thought about Thresh's execution, staged to test our response. The quota documentation left where I could find it, deliberate, to see what I'd do with the information. The countdown creating exactly the paranoid conditions for trainees to kill each other. Every element had been engineered. The jungle's dangers were real, but the human conditioning was the actual trial. They weren't training us to fight Catachan. They were training us to survive by becoming predators ourselves. The Imperium didn't need soldiers who'd die for the Emperor. It needed killers who'd live by letting others die. Maxon spoke for the first time since the latrine, his voice strange without the hymns that usually punctuated it. So what do we do? Resist and die, proving we're human? Or become what they want and survive as monsters? Yenna's laugh returned, that manic sound idea, heard since the first day. But now I understood it differently. It wasn't crazy. It was the sound of someone who'd already answered that question in the Underhive and hated the answer. False choice, choir boy. We do both. We survive. We stay human. We just don't tell them the second part. She looked at each of us. We play their game, pass their tests, make them think we're the killers they want, but we remember who we are. We protect each other. And when this is over, we stay people. Damaged, broken people, but people. Braca rumbled agreement. A tag fell from the tree, not pulled by wind, but released as the bark finally finished consuming its metal. It landed at my feet. I picked it up. The edges were soft, partially digested, the stamped name barely legible. Trainee 23. Someone from an earlier cohort, months before we arrived. I looked up and realized new branches were growing, spreading, preparing for the next harvest. The tree was thriving on the dead. It had been deliberately cultivated here. The memorial grove wasn't a memorial. It was a feeding ground. The Imperium tended it carefully, generation after generation. We weren't people. We were nutrients for a system that never stopped consuming. A whistle sounded across the compound, all trainees to formation. 36 hours until the final trial. Time to learn the rules of the Screaming Hollow. The 42 survivors stood in ragged formation. 8 more had died since morning, the countdown accelerating. I saw the gaps, the empty spaces, and did the mathematics automatically. 30 must survive, 42 remain. 12 more must die in the hollow. The quota would be met. Venko emerged from the command post. Her movements were precise as always, but I noticed details I'd learned to read. Tension in her shoulders, hand resting near her blade, the speed of her approach. She wasn't afraid of us. She was afraid of what was coming for us. Her briefing was characteristically quiet, forcing us to lean in to hear. The Screaming Hollow. 3,000 square kilometers. You have 72 hours to reach extraction point Sigma 9. Coordinates being uploaded to your chronometers now. She detailed the loadout. Knife, machete, single las, rifle with 3 charge packs, 2 days water, no rations, no Vox communication, no air support, no extraction for stragglers. 30 of you will make it. The Hollow will teach the rest a final lesson about inadequacy. Technical details followed. Terrain features, predator territories, toxic zones, but they were just noise. What mattered was what she wasn't saying. Then her eyes met mine directly. Deliberate eye contact that lasted 3 seconds. She'd never singled me out before. Never acknowledged me individually. In that 3-second look, something passed between us. A warning. Not spoken, not gestured, just communicated through the intensity of her gaze. Something else would be in the hollow with us. Something Worse than the environment. Worse than the natural predators. Something released deliberately. Her eyes broke away and she continued the briefing as if nothing had happened. But my hands were shaking. Whatever was coming, even Venko feared it. Formation dismissed. We returned to the barracks to prepare gear. This was the last night. Tomorrow at dawn, the final trial began. I checked my weapons, tested my blade's edge, went through the rituals of preparation, but my hands kept returning to my chronometer, watching the seconds count down. 21 hours, then the screaming hollow, then answers. Night fell. The barracks were quiet, most trainees pretending to sleep, some actually managing it. I lay awake, listening to breathing patterns, calculating who was genuinely resting and who was waiting for opportunities. My watch rotation. Yenna sleeping with a knife under her pillow. Maxon staring at nothing, lips moving in silent attempts at hymns that wouldn't come. And Braca sitting up in his bunk, writing in his journal by the light of a small bioluminescent strip. The giant had been writing for an hour, filling pages with his careful script. Then he stopped, read what he'd written, and made a decision. He stood, crossed the barracks in absolute silence despite his size, and placed his journal on my bunk. He'd left it open. Deliberately, I realized. One page contained a sketch of remarkable skill. My face, rendered with unexpected compassion and detail. Every scar, every fear line, every trace of exhaustion captured with an artist's precision. Beneath the sketch, in Braca's careful handwriting. This one remembers who he was before the grain silos. This one might remember after. Worth protecting, worth speaking for, when the time comes. I looked up, found Braca watching from across the barracks. For the first time in weeks, the giant nodded. Not approval. Acknowledgement. A promise. The morning klaxon screamed its mechanical demand, cutting through everything, consuming the moment before I could respond. Hope offered and immediately stolen by time itself. Trainees rose like the dead, gathering gear with mechanical precision. The final trial had begun, and the screaming hollow waited. The screaming hollow earned its name from the trees. Not the wind through branches. The trees themselves screamed when they sensed warm blood, a keening frequency that triggered panic responses in human nervous systems. The first trainee to freeze was impaled by a barbed root within 30 seconds of entering. 47 of us stood at the hollow's edge as dawn light failed to penetrate the canopy ahead. The green was wrong even by Catachan standards. Bioluminescent, pulsing, alive with intention. It didn't just look different, it felt different, the way a loaded weapon feels different from an empty one. Venko stood apart from us, hand resting on her sidearm. She said nothing, offered no final advice, no tactical wisdom, no emperor's blessing, just watched us with those flat eyes while the silence stretched until someone's nerve broke. Trainee 23 bolted forward first, deciding speed might equal survival. Others followed in a ragged rush. I felt Braca's hand on my shoulder. Steady pressure. Not restraining, but grounding. He'd positioned himself at point without anyone appointing him. Yenna fell in on my right, Maxon at rear. We moved as a unit into hell. The threshold was physical. I felt it crossing, temperature drop, air pressure change, the smell shifting from rot to something sweetly chemical, like counterseptic mixed with decay. Behind us, the normal jungle. Ahead, something that had evolved specifically to kill. The trees screamed. Not a sound, a frequency. It bypassed my ears entirely and went straight into bone marrow, into the brainstem where prey animal terror lives. My legs locked, every muscle seized with the overwhelming certainty that movement meant death, that freezing was the only option, that... Braca's hand clamped on my arm and pulled. Forward, the only direction that mattered. Trainee 68 wasn't so lucky. I saw him freeze completely 20 meters ahead, mouth open in a scream his throat couldn't produce. The ground beneath him erupted. A barbed root, thick as my thigh, moving with serpent speed, punched through his torso and lifted him 3 meters into the air. For a heartbeat, he hung there, transfixed, still trying to scream. Then the root retracted into the earth, taking him with it. 5 seconds. That's how long it took for the jungle floor to close over the disturbed earth, leaving only blood-soaked moss and the impression of something feeding below. We kept moving because stopping meant joining him. The canopy closed overhead within minutes. Visibility dropped to meters. I heard other trainees dying around us, screams cut short, wet sounds of tearing, the heavy collapse of bodies hitting ground, but I couldn't see the sources. The green bioluminescence made everything look underwater, distorted, wrong. Yenna pointed left. Razor bark on the trees, serrated edges that wept clear sap. A trainee I didn't recognize stumbled against one and the bark opened his arm to bone. He didn't scream. He'd learned better. But the blood in the air changed everything. The trees screamed louder. Braca made a hand signal. Contract formation, move as one organism. We closed ranks, weapons out, watching each angle. Somewhere behind us, a single last shot cracked through the hollow. Then silence. Someone had tried to fight back. The jungle had won. I counted deaths by sound. 9 in the first 15 minutes. If the attrition continued at this rate, the quota would be met through environmental kill alone. Then I realized that was exactly the design. The Hollow was doing the instructor's work for them. Venko wasn't hunting us, she was herding us into a grinder. "Don't stop moving," Yenna whispered. Her voice carried genuine fear for the first time since I'd met her. "Whatever you hear, whoever screams, don't stop." We pushed deeper. The ground became treacherous. What looked like solid earth gave way to pockets of some organic slurry that burned exposed skin. Braca tested every step, choosing path by instinct I didn't understand, but trusted completely. Ahead, movement. Trainee 41, maybe 50 meters away, stepping into ground cover that Braca had carefully avoided. The moment his boot touched down, I saw it. Spore moss, the patches slightly different green than surrounding vegetation. He inhaled. The paralysis was instantaneous. He stood frozen, eyes wide, fully conscious as the moss began growing up his legs. Real-time growth, seeking moisture and warmth, colonizing living tissue. His eyes screamed what his paralyzed throat couldn't. 3 minutes. That's how long it took. We watched him die standing up while the moss grew into his uniform, into his mouth, into his eyes. At the end, his paralyzed throat managed one choked sound before the spores filled his airways completely. Maxon started to pray, but no words came, just his lips moving uselessly. We reached a stream crossing. The water looked clear, moved sluggishly, reflected the bioluminescent canopy like liquid emerald. It looked perfect. That should have been the warning. Maxon knelt to test it. Yenna stopped him, pointing to a branch overhanging the water where bark had dripped sap into the flow. Where the sap touched water, it bubbled and the branch showed bone-white scarring. The water wasn't water. It was digestive enzyme, a feeding mechanism. The stream was a mouth. "This isn't a jungle," Yenna said quietly. "It's an organism, one massive organism that's been feeding for..." Venko appeared on the opposite bank. No one had heard her approach. She'd been standing there watching, possibly for minutes. She made eye contact with me, just me, and nodded once. Acknowledgement of something I didn't understand. Then she turned toward the sounds of struggle upstream. Trainee 41's friend had tried to save him from the spore moss, gotten infected himself. He was conscious, half paralyzed, begging. Venko walked to him calmly, drew her sidearm. 29, to go. You're wasting time." Single shot. Head, clean. She didn't stay to watch the body. She vanished back into the green like she'd never been there. We stood in silence. Finally, Yenna spoke. "She's counting down. 29 more have to die." She's making sure the numbers work. The Emperor provides what we require, Maxon said automatically, but his voice was hollow, mechanical, faithless. Braca found us a crossing, a fallen log that I realized Venko had deliberately positioned to be visible. She wasn't just culling, she was guiding the survivors towards something. I crossed the log and looked down at the enzyme stream. Bones at the bottom, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, dissolving slowly in the acid. Old bones. This trial had been run before, many times. The Memorial Grove's thousands of tags suddenly made horrible sense. This wasn't new. This was institutional. The Imperium had been doing this deliberately, repeatedly, because the mathematics said it worked. I felt something inside me go cold and still. Not horror anymore. Just calculation, numbers, survival odds, the emotional death that precedes the physical kind. We pushed deeper into the hollow's heart. The environment intensified, toxic air that made breathing feel like drowning, ground that writhed with motion just below the surface, trees that bled when branches shifted overhead. Behind us, periodically, we heard single shots. Venko enforcing the quota, patient, inevitable. At 13:47 hours, the silence arrived. Every sound in the hollow stopped simultaneously. The tree screams, the distant movements, the rustle of predatory vegetation, even the wet sounds of the stream behind us. The absence was so complete I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. Braca stopped moving instantly. Closed fist signal. Everyone froze. 30 seconds of that drowning silence. Then, from perhaps 200 meters away, something massive moving through undergrowth. Too many legs, too fluid, too fast. The movement sounds were wrong. Biomechanics that didn't match anything terrestrial. The Catachan devil had entered the trial. Braca's next signal was unmistakable. Move now, perpendicular to that sound. We navigated toward the rocky elevation where vegetation thinned. Behind us, screams erupted, human and terminal. The devil had found trainees. We didn't look back. We climbed, hands bleeding on razor stone, adrenaline masking the worst of the pain. The outcrop gave us sight lines down into the hollow's bowl. From that vantage, I saw what was happening below. 3 separate trainee groups being herded together by the devil's movements, driven into a killing zone like cattle into a slaughterhouse chute. The devil wasn't hunting randomly. I scanned the canopy and found her. Venko, on another outcrop, speaking into a Vox unit, watching the slaughter with clinical detachment, adjusting the devil's path with radio commands. Someone was directing it. The final horror wasn't natural selection, it was artificial culling with a living weapon. The devil emerged into partial visibility below. I saw it through vegetation gaps, chitin the color of old blood, limbs like segmented blades, compound eyes that reflected bioluminescence in fractal patterns. It moved through the trainee group like a threshing machine. One of them, young, dark-haired, screaming for his mother, looked exactly like my brother had looked the last time I saw him alive on Verdun III. The devil took him. The feeding sounds were identical to the tyrannids in the grain silos. The wet tearing, the crack of bone. The sound of something eating while its prey still lived. I was back in the silos. 3 weeks in darkness, listening to my family being consumed, my mother screaming, my brother calling my name, and me hiding, doing nothing, frozen with terror while they died because I was too weak to... Maxon's hand clamped over my mouth, dragged me backward from the edge. I was making sounds, attracting attention, getting us killed. Yenna threw a smoke canister toward another group, drawing the devil's attention away from our position. Braca positioned himself between us and the approach vector, utterly still, utterly ready to die, buying us time. They moved as a coordinated unit while I was dead weight, my body refusing every command. We descended the outcrop's far side, boots slipping on blood-slick stone. Reached cover just as the devil crested the ridge where we'd been standing. It paused, scented the air with organs I couldn't identify, then followed the smoke toward easier prey. But it knew we were here now. It had our scent profile. In the deadfall's temporary safety, Yenna slapped me hard enough to split my lip. "Stay here. Stay now. Your brother is dead. That wasn't him. If you freeze again, I'll leave you myself." The cruelest kindness she could offer. Maxon said nothing, but his hand stayed on my shoulder. Anchor to reality. Proof was here now, not there then. Braca wrote quickly in his journal, then showed me. "The devil has your scent. It will return. Master this or die. We cannot save you twice." He closed the journal and took point again. The march continued. I tasted blood from my split lip and focused on the physical sensation. The devil had my scent. The devil would return. But for now we were moving, and movement meant survival. I counted my breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The rhythm Thresh had taught me before they executed him for teaching it. The dead instructor's kindness keeping me alive in the place designed to kill him. Everyone who helped me was dead, or would be soon, and I was still here, still breathing, still taking up space that could be someone else's survival. The mathematics should have felt wrong. They didn't. That absence of wrongness was proof that Catachan had succeeded. Night began to fall. The bioluminescence intensified as daylight failed completely, transforming the hollow into something that looked like drowning in toxic stars. We reached the rocky outcrop from Venko's coordinates, halfway to extraction. Defensible, but not safe. A rock shelf 8 meters across with sheer drops on 3 sides, and a narrow approach the devil could use but would have difficulty navigating. We set up in a defensive circle, weapons out, exhaustion showing in every movement. Below us, the hollow came alive with night predators. Their sounds created a symphony of killing, things hunting, things dying, the endless cycle continuing without pause. Somewhere in that green light, other survivors were dying. We heard the screams. We didn't respond. The count had become background mathematics. The Vox unit activated. None of us had known we were carrying trackers. The sound made us all flinch. Electronic intrusion into organic hell. Venko's voice, quiet as always. 23 remain. Quota requires 18 survivors maximum. Choose 5 among yourselves by dawn, or the devil will choose for you. The timer begins now. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, I felt 3 pairs of eyes and knew my companions felt the same. The mathematics were clear. 4 of us. 5 must die. The equation didn't balance unless we turned on each other, or found other survivors and condemned them instead. Yenna laughed. Not her usual manic humor, but something hollow and broken. "So, this is the final lesson. We kill each other, or something else kills us. Either way, they win." Maxon's lips moved in automatic prayer, but no sound emerged. His faith had died, but his body kept performing the rituals. Braca opened his journal, wrote for a long moment, then closed it without showing anyone. Waiting for someone to solve the equation, to find the path that didn't end in betrayal. But there wasn't one. That was the lesson. Survival required choosing who dies. I looked at my 3 companions in the toxic starlight. Yenna, who laughed through hell until hell finally stopped being funny. Maxon, whose faith shattered, but whose body kept moving. Braca, who chose me as worth protecting, worth speaking for when the time comes. These were the only people left in the universe who mattered, and mathematics demanded that at least one of them must die. I thought about the boy in the grain silo who hid while his family was consumed. That boy made a choice. Survival at the cost of action. This moment offered the same choice elevated to nightmare. Survival at the cost of betrayal, or death with whatever humanity remained. I realized I was going to find a way to keep my 3 people alive, and if that meant condemning 5 strangers to death, I would do it. The realization should have felt like corruption. It felt like clarity. Catachan had won. Dawn was 8 hours away. The devil was somewhere in the green darkness below, scenting for our position. 5 people must die, either by choice or by claw. The night stretched ahead, like a trial with no correct answer, only wrong choices with different body counts. In the distance, another scream cut short. 22 now. The quota adjusted. The timer continued. And 4 people who started as victims realized they were being forced to become executioners or corpses. There was no third option. There never was. I had 17 minutes until dawn when I decided to become the thing Catachan wanted. Not a soldier, a survivor. A man who would let others die so my people could live. I told myself the choice was forced. I would tell myself that for the rest of my life. The mathematics was simple. 23 survivors remained. Quota required 18 maximum. 5 must die. 4 of us crouched on this outcrop. The equation didn't balance unless we found 5 strangers and condemned them to the devil's attention. I'd hidden in a grain silo while my family was consumed. This was the same choice wearing different clothes. Survival through inaction elevated to survival through murder. The difference was I could pretend this was tactics instead of cowardice. The rationalization felt thin even as I clung to it. "We use ourselves as bait," I whispered. The words tasted like copper. "There's a cluster of trainees 300 meters northeast. I saw their light discipline failing during the last Vox check. We lead the devil toward them, let it engage, escape in the chaos." Yenna stared at me in the toxic starlight. Her laugh came out broken. "So we're the bait and the hunters. Fitting." She paused, and something in her expression shifted. Recognition, maybe, of what we were becoming. At least when I murdered people in the Underhive, I had the decency to look them in the eyes first. Maxon said nothing. His lips moved in automatic prayer, but no sound emerged. He just nodded, his faith voice gone, his body operating on autopilot. The boy who saw everything as divine testing had stopped asking if the Emperor watched. The silence was his answer. Braca opened his journal, wrote something in careful script despite the darkness, then showed it to me. His handwriting was remarkably elegant. "This is what they wanted. We become it or we die. I choose becoming." He closed the journal and looked at me with those judging eyes. Not condemning, approving. I had passed some test I hadn't known I was taking. We moved out with 14 minutes remaining. The screaming hollow at night was a different beast than by day. The trees didn't scream without light stimulus, but something else did. Distant howls that might have been wind through rock formations, or might have been the last sounds of dying trainees. The bioluminescence provided ghost light, just enough to navigate by, not enough to see threats until they were close. We moved with practiced silence now. Catachan taught. Each footfall placed deliberately to avoid carnivorous moss that would crackle and alert predators. Our breathing synchronized to minimize noise. We'd learned this through watching others fail. Every lesson here was written in someone else's blood. I could see the trainee cluster ahead. 9 of them, exhausted, weapons pointed outward in a defensive circle that would do exactly nothing against what was coming. They'd found a hollow between root structures and convinced themselves it was, defensible. They were children, playing soldier, waiting for dawn and extraction, believing survival was about endurance rather than sacrifice. I marked their position on my data slate. My hands didn't shake. That absence of tremor felt like proof of something breaking inside me. 12 minutes, Yenna breathed against my ear. Do it now or we're in the quota ourselves. I triggered the proximity alarm we'd stripped from a corpse 3 hours ago. The electronic chirp cut through the hollow like a blade through flesh. Artificial sound in an organic hell, impossible to miss, impossible to ignore. Below us, the 9 trainees froze. They'd heard it. They knew what it meant. The devil was coming, drawn by sound like a shark to blood, and we'd just rung the dinner bell. The jungle went silent. Every predator in a square kilometer recognized that silence, the moment when something larger arrives and everything else flees or hides. The normal cacophony of night hunting ceased, as if someone had cut the audio. Then the trees began to bleed, not metaphorically, actual bleeding, where something with razor-edged limbs had passed through branches so quickly the wood hadn't registered the damage until seconds later. Sap ran dark in the bioluminescence, looking like arterial spray. The devil was already inside their perimeter. It had been there for minutes, stalking, choosing, waiting for the right moment. The alarm had simply given it permission to stop playing with its food. The first trainee died without sound. He was there, scared but functional, weapon raised, and then he wasn't. Something took him into the canopy so fast, reality seemed to edit him out of existence. His weapon clattered to the ground 3 seconds after he vanished. Then the screaming started. I couldn't see details. The devil moved too quickly, the light was too poor, and my angle was wrong. But I heard everything. The wet, tearing sounds, the screams that cut off mid-note, the impact of bodies hitting root structures with bone-breaking force. One trainee managed to fire his laser gun. The bolts illuminated glimpses, something massive and segmented, moving with insect speed, razor limbs extending and retracting like surgical instruments performing triage on a battlefield. It was beautiful in the way a perfect killing machine is beautiful. Evolution's answer to the question of what eats everything else. And I had led it there. "Move!" I hissed, and we ran. We covered 200 meters before my guilt caught up with my legs and tried to stop me. I kept running anyway. Catachan had taught me that hesitation kills, and guilt was just another form of weakness to be purged. Behind us, the screaming stopped. 9 dead in under 3 minutes. The mathematics worked. 11 total casualties. 12 survivors remained, including us. Only 6 more needed to die. We were going to make it. Yenna started laughing as we ran. Involuntary, horrified, triumphant. The sound was wrong, twisted, victorious, and sick simultaneously. We'd won by feeding people to a monster. The laugh said everything about what we'd become. Then she stopped mid-stride, not slowed. Stopped, frozen completely, 1 foot raised, body rigid. I skidded to a halt and grabbed her shoulder. "Yenna, move!" Her eyes were open but seeing something else. Not the jungle, not me. Somewhere distant and terrible that she'd never escaped. Through the trees ahead, I saw what had triggered her. 2 trainees, one being fed upon by a Catachan barking toad. The toxin had paralyzed the girl but left her conscious. She was approximately 17, female, and her eyes were aware as the toad consumed her slowly, deliberately, helpless suffering, witnessed, unavenged. Exactly what Yenna had endured in the corpse starch vats when she was 14. She told me once, late at night when sleep wouldn't come, how she'd been thrown into the vats by gangers, how the processing equipment had malfunctioned and trapped her, how she'd watched others dissolve while she breathed through a gap in the machinery for 3 days. She wasn't in Catachan anymore. She was 14, in the vats, drowning in dead flesh, watching others die while she hid and survived. Trauma doesn't care about time. It makes everything simultaneous. "Yenna!" I shook her, hard. She didn't respond. Her hands trembled, but the rest of her was rigid. The freeze response, the paralysis of overwhelming horror. I knew it intimately. I'd felt it when Kosh died. Behind us, branches cracked. The devil, finishing with the first cluster, following our trail. It had tasted blood and wanted more. Braca moved to help, but Maxon grabbed him, understanding what I couldn't accept yet. If we all broke cover to save Yenna, we all died. The mathematics were brutally clear. "Please," whispered, knowing she couldn't hear me. "Please, not like this. Not you." The ground vibrated, something massive approaching with purpose. Then Yenna blinked, her eyes focused, found mine, and I saw terrible clarity there. She understood where she was, what was coming, what I'd done by triggering that alarm. "Not again," she said quietly. "Not this time." She shoved me, hard, unexpected, sending me stumbling backward into Bracca's arms. Her voice was clear, decided, liberated. "You make it. You warn them about what's coming. This isn't sacrifice. This is me choosing." The devil emerged from the darkness between trees, not rushing, stalking. It recognized frozen prey. "Yenna, don't. I died in that vat anyway," she said, turning toward the devil with her weapon raised. "This is just making it official. But this time I choose. This time I'm not hiding." She opened fire, full automatic, mag dumping, no attempt at precision or conservation. The devil recoiled from the impacts, not damaged, but surprised. It hadn't expected resistance from paralyzed prey. Yenna was screaming now, wordless, primal, releasing every sound she couldn't make in the vats. Every moment of helpless suffering transformed into rage and noise and choice. Bracca dragged me backward while Maxon laid suppressing fire. I fought him, tried to reach her, knowing it was useless and trying anyway because what else do you do when someone dies for you? The last thing I saw, Yenna, still firing, still screaming, transformed into something magnificent and terrible. Then the devil's limb took her across the midsection with surgical precision. Her scream cut off mid-note, but the laugh, that final, genuine laugh she'd made before opening fire, somehow kept echoing. We ran blind through the hollow while that echo chased us. 200 meters before Bracca signaled halt. We'd reached the devil's normal pursuit range limit. It should have stopped. It hadn't. I could hear it behind us, closer than possible, moving with purpose. 8 trainees remained beside us. 2 more deaths, and we'd hit quota. Dawn was 6 minutes away. Ahead, I could see extraction, lights, servitors, the perimeter fence that marked survival's threshold. So close, I could smell promethium and processed air instead of rot and blood. Then Bracca looked at me with something that might have been goodbye. The devil came from ahead, not behind. It had circled us, herded us. Venko's voice crackled on proximity vox. 4 minutes to dawn. Quota incomplete. Adjust accordingly. The devil stood between us and extraction. 2 of us needed to die here, within sight of salvation. The system demanded it. I felt rage ignite, pure, clean, useless. Even here, at the threshold, they were still culling us, still enforcing mathematics written in flesh. The devil moved. It went for Maxon, wounded, slower, easier prey. The razor limb extended in what seemed like slow motion. I saw Maxon's face, not fear, just exhaustion. He was ready to die. His faith had already preceded him to the grave. I moved to intercept, knowing I wouldn't make it, understanding this was where I died, trying to save someone instead of hiding. The boy in the grain silo's final chance at redemption. Then a voice I'd never heard spoke 2 words. Down, now. Bracca. I dropped instinctively, and the limb passed overhead, close enough to feel the displacement. The impact came behind me, wet, final, the sound of razor-edged chitin meeting flesh. Bracca had taken the blow meant for me. The limb had entered his abdomen and exited his back, bisecting everything important. He should have been dead. He wasn't. Catachan forged physiology. Catachan trained will and something deeper, pure determination. He grabbed the limb embedded in him with both hands and held it. The devil tried to withdraw. Bracca wouldn't release it. Blood pulsed arterial bright around the wound, but his grip stayed locked. His eyes found mine. His free hand reached into his jacket, shaking now, death making itself known, and produced his journal. Blood-soaked, precious, offered. He pressed it into my hands with surprising gentleness. His lips moved, no sound remaining, but I could read the shape. Read it. Then he smiled. It was the first expression I'd ever seen on his face besides judgment, and it transformed him. Gentle, almost paternal, approving. He'd decided I was worth this. Braca turned toward the devil, both hands back on the limb piercing him, and pulled it deeper. He was advancing, step by step, driving the thing that was killing him further into himself to drive the devil backward, away from us. He roared, the only other sound he made in all our time together. Primal, endless, defiant. Braca, no! The word ripped out of me. He looked back once. His expression said, yes, this is the choice. Honor it. Maxon grabbed my jacket and dragged. I couldn't look away as Braca fought the devil bare-handed, a dead man using his last seconds to inflict damage, to matter, to choose. Then Sergeant Venko appeared from the tree line. She was moving faster than should have been possible for her age. Weapons deployed, and she wasn't observing, she was attacking. Venko versus the devil, 30 years of Catachan experience against evolution's apex predator. She was using everything. Toxins, blades, traps deployed from concealed pouches, knowledge of devil anatomy that let her strike nerve clusters with surgical precision. She wasn't trying to kill it. She couldn't. She was buying seconds, measured in her blood, paid for with her life. Her body accumulated wounds, but she didn't slow. This was what she did. This was what she'd always done. Maxon hauled me to the perimeter. 30 meters, 20, 10. The devil couldn't cross the fence. Venko positioned herself between it and us, bleeding from a dozen wounds, still fighting with precision that transcended pain. As we crossed the threshold, safety, extraction, survival, she spoke. Not loudly. She never raised her voice, but it carried. I didn't make you hard because I hated you. I made you hard because something worse is coming, and soft men become food. A razor limb took her across the throat mid-sentence. She died, looking at me. Her last expression wasn't pain. It was satisfaction. The quota was met. The devil stopped at the perimeter's exact boundary. It didn't pursue, didn't test the fence. It simply watched with its compound eyes, then withdrew into the jungle with deliberate calm. It was never meant to kill all of us. It was a tool, precisely calibrated, performing its function perfectly. I counted survivors crossing into extraction. 18 total, not 17, not 19, 18, exactly quota. Servitors began processing us immediately. Medical scans, equipment checks, readiness assessment, no rest, no ceremony, no acknowledgement of what had just happened. Maxon stood beside me, staring at nothing. His breathing was mechanical, empty. His body had survived. Whatever lived inside it had died with his faith. I looked at my hands, holding Braca's journal, blood-soaked, precious. I was alive. Yenna died laughing. Braca died speaking. Venko died protecting. I was alive. The mathematics said my survival was worth 3 deaths. I didn't believe that. I didn't believe anything anymore. Dawn broke over the screaming hollow. The light was wrong. Too bright. Too clean, revealing too much. Bodies visible in the distance, becoming carrion. The jungle would reclaim them by nightfall. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I'd see them for the rest of my life anyway. A servitor handed me a data slate while another treated my wounds with mechanical efficiency. I opened Braca's journal with shaking hands. Page after page of detailed observations about each trainee. Philosophical reflections written in careful script. Sketches of remarkable skill. The hollow, the creatures, us. I found the final entry, dated the night before. I stopped speaking when I realized words could not describe what the Imperium does to souls. Today I spoke 2 words for someone worth breaking silence. I hope he understands what I could not say. Surviving is only the beginning of the horror. What comes next is why they made us this way. In the distance, shuttle engines spun up. No rest, no recovery, immediate deployment. I closed the journal as the sound grew louder, mechanical thunder drowning out the organic sounds of Catachan's endless hunger. 3 people died believing I needed to survive what was coming. That burden was heavier than any weight Catachan had placed on me. I didn't want to know what was worse than this, but I owed the dead my survival, and that debt demanded I find out. The shuttle descended through dawn light. Extraction, salvation. The entrance exam was over. The real horror was about to begin. The shuttle landed precisely 14 minutes after the last survivor crossed the extraction perimeter. No medics, no debriefing, no time to count our dead. Just a single logistics servitor with a data slate full of orders. I stood on the ferrocrete pad with 17 others, 18 total, exactly quota, while behind us, the screaming hollow continued its eternal chorus. The extraction platform was a scar of human construction in Catachan's flesh. Ferrocrete poured over a jungle that constantly tried to reclaim it. Sap still bled from the edges where force barriers held back the green. The air smelled wrong, less rot spore blood, more the sterile, recycled atmosphere bleeding from the shuttle's open ramp. The change was jarring. I'd adapted to Catachan's smell. This clean air felt hostile. The servitor descended the ramp, its augmetic legs clicking precise rhythms on ferrocrete, while behind us something screamed in the distance. Half flesh, half machinery, its face wore the expression of the dead. Glassy eyes that tracked without seeing. Different from Maxon's dead eyes. The servitor had never been fully alive. Maxon had been and wasn't anymore. I still held Bracca's journal. The leather cover was sticky with blood that had oxidized to brown. My hands wouldn't release it. Around me, the other survivors stood in loose approximation of formation. We held our weapons too tightly, tracking movement like prey animals that couldn't quite believe the hunting had stopped. Someone's breath came too fast. Someone else trembled despite the heat. I checked myself. Steady hands, even breathing, heart rate elevated but controlled. The training had worked on my body even if my mind was somewhere else. The servitor stopped 3 meters away and spoke without preamble or acknowledgement. Trainee 73, Darren Colm. Graduated status confirmed. Deployment orders acknowledged. Step aside. The voice was mechanical, bored, utterly indifferent. It pressed a data slate into my hands, cold, smooth, heavier than it should be, and gestured for me to move. I took it on autopilot, my hands obeying before my thoughts caught up. I stepped aside. The servitor continued down the line. Trainee 147, Maxon Cole. Graduated status confirmed. Maxon took his slate but didn't read it. His eyes focused on nothing. When I said his name softly, he didn't respond. I tried again, louder. His head turned toward me with mechanical slowness, but his eyes never focused. His mouth opened and closed silently, forming shapes that might have been prayers, but producing no sound. The thing that made him Maxon, the choir boy who sang hymns to keep his faith alive, was gone. The body remained, a warning written in flesh. One by one, survivors took their slates and moved to form a new line. No one spoke. No one looked at each other. We'd survived together, and now existed in separate isolation, each processing what couldn't be processed. The servitor finished and delivered a single sentence without inflection or pause. Congratulations on successful completion of Catachan Selection Protocol Gamma 7. You are now jungle fighters. Immediate deployment commences in 22 minutes. The Macarian Crusade requires your service. Board the shuttle. Then it turned and walked back up the ramp. That was it. That was the ceremony. 18 survivors out of 200, and the Imperium's acknowledgement was a servitor's scripted line delivered between logistics updates. I looked down at the data slate in my hands. I hadn't read it yet. Part of me didn't want to. As long as I didn't read it, I could pretend there might be rest, recovery, time to process what we'd endured. But I knew better. The Imperium didn't waste resources on sentiment. We boarded slowly, like condemned men walking to execution. The shuttle interior was cramped, functional, designed to move meat efficiently. 18 of us in crash webbing meant for 40. The empty spaces where the dead should be were obvious. Everything was clean, sterile, maintained. Everything Catachan wasn't. But somehow that made it more hostile. At least the jungle's hatred had been honest. This mechanical efficiency felt like contempt. I strapped into my webbing and forced myself to read the orders. First section, Standard Deployment Information. Regiment Designation, Transport Schedule, Equipment Manifest. I skimmed past it, barely processing. Second section, Tactical Briefing. The words Verdun 3 Sector hit me like a fist. I stopped breathing. Not Verdun 3 itself, the sector. Close enough to matter. I scrolled further, my hands suddenly unsteady. Mission Brief. Counter Tyranid operations against identified Hive Fleet designation. I saw the classification code and my vision narrowed. The same fleet, the same Xenos force that had consumed my homeworld, my family, my life before. The thing I'd hidden from while my mother screamed. The nightmare I'd carried through 10 weeks of Catachan hell. My hands began to shake. The data slate rattled against my webbing. I scrolled to personnel notes, usually just equipment specializations or squad assignments. Found an addendum marked Analyst Commentary, Restricted. I shouldn't be able to see it. Servitor processing had left it visible. I read, Subject KOLM, Darren. Origin, Verdun 3. Destroyed. Tyranid Incursion. Ref 447.829 on M41. Conscription circumstances. Sole survivor of agricultural settlement via extended concealment. Grain storage facility. 23 days. Family unit casualties. Total. Psychological assessment. Severe trauma response. Potential combat applications. Assignment rationale. Subject demonstrated anomalous survival capability during initial Tyranid contact. Return deployment to similar threat environment calculated to produce one of two outcomes. A. Trauma-enhanced combat effectiveness via familiarity-driven aggression. Or B. Rapid psychological breakdown resulting in combat casualty. Munitorum operational analysis. Both outcomes acceptable for high attrition deployment theater. Expected survival duration, 1431 days. Replacement tithe, already processed. The clinical language made it worse. I wasn't rescued. I was harvested. My survival wasn't remarkable. It was noted, catalogued, and weaponized. The Imperium looked at a traumatized boy and calculated how to extract maximum value before disposal. My family's death wasn't tragedy. It was my resume. My survival wasn't courage. It was data. Catachan wasn't punishment or training. It was calibration, tuning me for a specific purpose. They were sending me back because a man who hid in a silo while his mother screamed would either be motivated by revenge or paralyzed by memory, and the Imperium didn't care which. I was ammunition either way, expendable. Already calculated, already dead, just waiting for reality to catch up to the paperwork. The thought that broke something in my chest, my replacement was already processed. I looked up from the slate. Other survivors read their own orders. A few showed signs of similar revelations. Hands clenched white on data plates, jaws working silently. Most just stared at nothing, already beyond caring. They knew, I whispered. My voice sounded strange. Too calm, too level. They planned all of it. Maxon didn't respond, didn't even blink. His mercy was absence. He got to be gone for what came next. I would be present for all of it. The shuttle shuddered, breaking atmosphere. Through the small viewport, Catachan fell away below, an endless green hell that suddenly seemed almost gentle compared to what had been revealed. I remembered Venko's last words. Something worse is coming. She knew. She knew we were being prepared, not for war, but for calculated disposal. Her brutality was mercy. She tried to make us hard enough to survive what the Imperium would do to us. The training wasn't the horror. It was the anesthetic. I opened Bracca's journal with shaking hands, flipping to the final entry. Surviving is only the beginning of the horror. What comes next is why they made us this way. He knew too. They all knew. Everyone except us. The viewport showed stars now, cold points of light in absolute darkness. Catachan behind us. Ahead, nothing but void and whatever ship would carry us to Verdun 3's sector. I stared at those stars and deliberately reached for emotion like testing an injured limb. I found the shape of feelings, but not their substance. Fear existed as a concept. Grief was a word. My mother's face was a sketch missing details. I performed a weapons check, automatic. Muscle memory from 10 weeks of drilling. I field stripped my las rifle in 30 seconds, examined each component, reassembled it. The weapon was standard issue, maintained but not specialized. I knew with the tactical assessment Catachan had burned into my brain that it was inadequate for what was coming. Standard charge packs wouldn't drop a day. Tyrannid warrior, standard barrel length wouldn't handle sustained fire against swarm organisms. I was being sent to fight the galaxy's perfect predators with tools designed for human opponents. I catalogued these inadequacies without fear. They were just facts. When had this happened? When did I stop being the boy who hid in the silo? Was it when Kosh died because of my freeze? When I led the devil to other trainees? When I left Yenna to die? When I accepted Bracca's sacrifice? Or was it gradual, eroded by 10,000 small moments of choosing survival over humanity? I couldn't identify the moment. There was just before, a person who felt things, and after. The training had worked exactly as designed. Catachan didn't break me. It refined me, reduced me to essence, burned away everything except the capacity to survive and kill. I was efficient now, purposeful, empty. I caught my reflection in the viewport's dark surface, my face superimposed over to the stars beyond. For a moment, I didn't recognize it. The features were mine. The jaw, the nose, the scar above my eyebrow from the first week's face-eater encounter. But the expression was wrong. The eyes were wrong. They were flat, watchful, predatory, the same quality I'd seen in the instructor's eyes and didn't understand then. I understood now. Those weren't the eyes of someone who experienced life. They were the eyes of someone who processed threats and calculated responses. I tried to smile. The reflection's mouth moved, but the eyes didn't change. I was wearing my face like a uniform, but whatever used to inhabit it had been court-martialed and executed for weakness. What remained was a thing that looked like Darren Combe and would answer to that name, but wasn't him in any way that mattered. A memory surfaced. My mother's face the last time I saw her alive, telling me to hide in the silo while she led the Tyranids away from my younger brother. She was terrified, but determined. Human, present. I tried to hold the memory, but it was slipping. Her face was losing detail. Was her hair pulled back or down? Were her eyes brown or hazel? I was forgetting. Not because time had passed, but because the part of me that held emotional memory had been cauterized. I knew intellectually that I'd loved her. I could recite facts about her, but I couldn't feel it anymore. The training didn't just teach me to survive. It taught me to amputate the parts that would make me hesitate. My family was becoming intelligence data, factors in my tactical profile rather than people I grieved. This should devastate me. Instead, I noted it and filed it away. Useful information. The shuttle docked with the transport ship, a shudder through the hull and the hiss of pressure seals. Around me, Survivors unbuckled from crash webbing and gathered equipment. They moved in silence, each isolated in processing what they'd read, what they'd become. I stood, settling my rifle across my chest in patrol carry. The weight was familiar, comfortable. This was the first thing that felt right since extraction. Not the human interaction, not the rest, the weapon. I'd become a thing that only made sense when armed. Maxon rose last, moving only because others were moving. I reached out and steadied him when he stumbled. The gesture was automatic. Preserve unit cohesion, protect squad members, not because Maxon was a person I cared about, because he was an asset. I recognized this utilitarian calculation for what it was. Exactly what Venko would have done. I'd become her. We all had. As we moved toward the airlock, I opened Bracca's journal one final time to the sketch he'd made of me, rendered with care and skill, showing compassion in every line. Beneath it, this one remembers who he was before the grain silos. This one might remember after, worth protecting, worth speaking for, when the time comes. Bracca was wrong. The thing that remembered was gone. But his final gift became clear. The journal was evidence that something had been lost. Proof that Darren Colm existed before he was refined into Trainee 73. I closed the journal and sealed it in my kit. Not to read, just to carry. A memorial to myself. We boarded the transport. The airlock closed behind us. I found my assigned berth in a compartment with 200 other soldiers. Fresh meat from other training worlds. Veterans with dead eyes, officers who looked through us rather than at us. The troop berth was a cathedral of meat. Thousands of bunks extending into darkness, each holding a body destined for consumption by war. The air smelled of unwashed humanity, weapons oil, and recycled atmosphere that never quite masked fear sweat. I found my bunk, third tier, section 447, no different from any other. I stowed my kit with mechanical efficiency and sat, the thin mattress offering no comfort because comfort wasn't the point. Around me, other soldiers performed the same rituals. Some prayed, some cleaned weapons, some stared at nothing. We were all the same, meat waiting for deployment. I thought about the boy who'd arrived on Catachan 8 weeks ago. That boy wanted to become someone his dead family would be proud of. Wanted to transform from the coward who hid into a protector. Wanted to feel human again. He'd succeeded and failed simultaneously. He became dangerous enough to never feel helpless again. But in doing so, he stopped being human enough to protect anything that mattered. His family wanted him to survive. He survived. But the thing that survived wasn't their son anymore. Mission accomplished in the worst possible way. I performed another weapons check, the third today, unnecessary but comforting. Each component was exactly as it should be. Standard issue, maintained, inadequate. When the Tyranids came, this rifle wouldn't be enough. My training wouldn't be enough. Nothing would be enough, because the Imperium was sending me to die and had calculated the exact duration of that death with actuarial precision. 14 to 31 days. I had a month, maybe, before the equations balanced and my replacement took this bunk. I should feel fear. I should feel rage. I searched for both and found only distant curiosity about which day in that range I'd fall on, closer to 14 or 31. The thought was almost amusing. I lay back and stared at the bunk above me. Someone had carved words into the metal frame. The Emperor protects. I read them several times, testing them for meaning. The phrase that had sustained Maxon through weeks of horror before shattering completely. I tried to remember what faith felt like, my family's simple devotion, the security of believing someone cared. I couldn't access it. Faith required hope, and hope required the belief that outcomes mattered. My outcome was already calculated. My death was already scheduled. The Emperor didn't protect. He processed. I was already dead, just fulfilling the paperwork. The horror wasn't that no one cared. It was that caring was never part of the equation. I and Maxon and Yenna and Braca and the 182 others were never people to the Imperium. We were numbers, resources, ammunition to be expended at calculated rates toward calculated objectives. Understanding this should break me. Instead, it was almost liberating. If I was never real to them, then my death wasn't real either. Just numbers balancing. Just accounts settling. I closed my eyes and searched for a prayer. Something to mark this moment, this final recognition of what I'd become. I found only one that felt honest. I hoped it would kill me quickly, not bravely or meaningfully, or in service to something greater. Just quickly, efficiently, without prolonged suffering. It was the closest thing to a prayer I had left. The Emperor wouldn't answer because the Emperor didn't listen to ammunition, but maybe the Tyranids would be merciful in their efficiency. Maybe becoming food would be faster than becoming ash. I didn't hope for survival anymore, just for an ending that didn't drag. That was what Catachan taught me. That was what the Imperium made me into. A thing that measured success by the speed of its destruction. Catachan was never the enemy. It was the entrance exam. The true horror hasn't even started yet.
Imagine a world where the very air you breathe